Hello, Topical, and welcome back to your NBA coverage from your best NBA correspondents in the business, Ryan Moret and Aradh Faruqi.
Hello, everybody.
So today we're going to be talking about the past week in the NBA. Our specials are probably going to be the playoffs that are coming up, what the playoffs maybe should look like. Should it be a 16-team tournament, and maybe should there be weighted series games, like the home team gets maybe 5 games and the away team gets 2 games instead of four and three. Talk about some of the developing players like Gary Harris and Drew Holiday. Talk a little bit about advanced metrics, some difficult questions that I've really been struggling over in my NBA following. And yeah, let's get right into things. So, Rod, you're usually the one to watch NBA games. What have you seen in the past week?
Oh, so we had it was a pretty exciting week in basketball, actually, in my opinion. Since the last game, since the last week, that Sunday that we watched the Suns Hawks game, I watched the Cavs play. I think last week we covered the Cavs quite a bit. I watched the Cavs Pistons, the Cavs Nuggets. I watched Rockets Thunder. I watched Cavs Nuggets. I watched Rockets Bucks. I watched Celtics Timberwolves, Spurs Warriors, Cavs Clippers, Rockets Raptors, Spurs Thunder, and earlier today, Warriors Timberwolves. So some great games this week.
Okay, well, I know before the podcast you wanted to get right into the Timberwolves Warriors game today, so I'm just going to throw the floor to you. What'd you think?
So today, I thought it was very interesting because so Steph Curry is currently out with an ankle tweak. So he missed the game against the or he exited the game against the Spurs on Thursday night. He left the game in the first 2 minutes of the game. Actually, he landed awkwardly.
Yeah, I saw that.
He left that game, and for the majority of that game, it was a very tightly contested game. It came down to the free throw game. LaMarcus Aldridge wisely he chucked up a three, but he got fouled. But he missed one of his 3 free throws. Then they had to intentionally foul. They sent Durant to the line, where Durant also missed a free throw. So it came down to the Spurs having to they Bryn Forbes got a wide open three and he missed. So that's Steph Curry's been out since then. And then Jimmy Butler, obviously, a few weeks ago tore his meniscus. So the matchup today was pretty interesting. It was the Warriors without Steph, and then the Timberwolves without Jimmy Butler. So I wouldn't call it an even matchup because there's still 3 All-Stars on the Warriors, but the Timberwolves grinded out. They grinded out a 6-point win. Karl Anthony Towns had 31 points and 16 rebounds. Jeff Teague had 10 assists. The Timberwolves actually had a pretty balanced attack. Taj Gibson had 11. Nemanja Bjelica had 10. Wiggins had 23. Towns had 31. Jeff Teague had 10 points and 10 assists. Taj Gibson also added 13 rebounds. What's interesting to me about the Warriors when they play without Stephen Curry is that even though Kevin Durant, some people think that he is in the conversation for being the best player in the world, he had 39 points. Oh, and also on this note, while I'm talking about the Warriors without Steph Curry, the Warriors also played the Portland Trailblazers on Friday night,
Yeah,
and they lost by 17 points.
yeah, I saw that too.
And Kevin Durant had 40 points, 6 assists, 6 rebounds. He made 6 threes, and he shot 12 for 21. So he had a pretty fantastic game against Portland. And Klay Thompson added 25 points, and then Draymond Green had a typical Draymond game: 7 points, 6 assists, 12 rebounds.
Yeah, jeez.
And they still, the fact that they lost was very, very. I kind of thought that they would be able to at least, compete with the Blazers. I didn't think that it would be a 17-point loss. I know the Blazers are hot right now, but basically, the main thing that I take away from this Warriors and Timberwolves game, it's the second game in a row that they've lost without Stephen Curry, and to me, it screams the importance of Steph Curry to the Warriors team, because it seems like even though Kevin Durant is a fantastic player, it sort of tells me that despite the fact that he has all the talent in the world, I think to a degree it tells me that he doesn't exactly elevate talent in the same way that a player like maybe LeBron James or James Harden does. Because James Harden with minimal talent last year won 55 games, and so yeah, they ended up losing to the Blazers by 17. They lost to the Timberwolves by 6. They just don't look like the same team to me because Durant had 40 against Portland and he had 39 against Minnesota, and it wasn't enough to get the job done either time.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point about Kevin Durant. Like, if you go back to like the 2015-16 Thunder, just thinking about the team around that, like it was really Russell Westbrook that was elevating the play of everyone else, and that was a big part of the reason why the ownership felt confident in releasing Kevin Durant, and everyone going around now not releasing trade. No, he did. They did let him walk, and like just
But
everyone in the
signing
league.
Russell's extension, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and like everyone in the league is trying to say, oh, Kevin Durant's much better than LeBron James, or oh, Kevin Durant's one of the top players in the league. Well, this demonstrates that if you're not even the best player on your team, you're not the best player in the league, and it's a good reminder that this isn't the same Warriors team as that the 16 17 no 15 16 team that they lost Stephen Curry in the Rockets Warriors series in the playoffs, and then they did fine against the Blazers Warriors with Klay Thompson leading the show. This isn't the same team as them.
Yeah, I completely agree because so there's one NBA analyst that I follow pretty well. His name is Chris Broussard, and I follow a lot of what he says about LeBron and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and all these things. And the one point that he brings out is that Kevin Durant or the Warriors in general as a team, when they do not have Steph Curry, they play a lot like a lot of other NBA teams in the sense that they play a lot of isolation. And their best player, which being Kevin Durant, handles the ball a majority of the time. Because I mean, Kevin Durant is he's not a point forward in the sense of the way that LeBron James is averaging 9 assists, but he
Yeah.
does a decent job. He averages about 5. He can get you 6, and every now and then he can get you a pretty good assist game of like 9 or 10. But just in the sense of he's because he's a ball handling scorer above all. He does play a lot of isolation because he is he's one of the more I would say he's the most difficult player in the NBA to guard.
Oh yeah.
If you discount James Harden's foul drawing ability, but
good point.
Kevin Durant, it's interesting to me because Steph Curry, I think the interesting thing about Steph Curry is that every time in the league, there's any time that there has been a shooter of Steph Curry's caliber, well, there hasn't been, but anytime there's been an amazing shooter, like, let's say Kyle Korver can knock shots down from very deep, even Klay Thompson can knock down deep threes. But the difference with Steph is that because Stephen Curry is able to, dribble past anyone playing very, very close to him, and because he's able to finish at the rim, because he's an elite mid-range shooter, he's an elite free throw shooter. Offensively, I really don't think, aside from athleticism, I don't think that there's that much of a weakness to Steph Curry's game, which makes him sort of the lead. Like, I wouldn't say that he's the leader of the team, but he's the leader of their offense. Like,
yes,
just in terms of their, like, he's the lead. He's what makes the Warriors. Like, without Stephen Curry playing the way that he's been playing ever since they went on their first really good run in 2000, the 14-15 season, and even prior to that when they were playing pretty well, he's been the driving force of what makes them the team that they are. Yeah. And I think that you see a lot of cracks in the way that they play on offense because they kind of struggle to produce because when Steph Curry is on the floor, today they only scored 103 points, and then in the game against Portland they only scored 108 points, and then when Steph Curry and obviously some of that simply has to do with the fact that Steph Curry is a 26 points per game scorer, but in the Spurs they only scored 110, and then against the Blazers 108, and then today 103. But when you see Steph in the lineup, you see numbers like 125, 123, 121, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I'm trying to pull up right now how many passes they had exactly, because I know the biggest thing that changed from when Mark Jackson was let go of and then Steve Kerr took over was that the team started passing a lot more, and that's really what Steph Curry is fantastic at beyond his shooting and.
Yeah, he is. I believe Steph Curry is an underrated passer. One of the knocks that I hear on Steph Curry is that he's not a pure point guard, which he's not because of his shooting ability. But I think he'd be hindering himself if he played like a true point guard with his shooting ability. But he still averages 7 assists, and I think what people don't talk about enough is that he splits ball handling duties with Kevin Durant and Draymond Green because Draymond Green also averages 7 assists and Kevin Durant averages 5. So I believe that if Stephen Curry played on this team by himself, maybe without Draymond, he could probably average around 9 or 10 assists just because he's a good passer. He makes the right pass a lot of times, and he's a very unselfish superstar, which I appreciate about his game. But I think Kevin Durant's rise since he's been on the Warriors, I think it has a lot more to do with Stephen Curry than it really does with Kevin Durant because Kevin Durant. Or offensively, at least, because defensively, obviously, Steph doesn't elevate to KD. But offensively, this is another statistic that I found out about Kevin Durant. So in his career, he's played, I think, around somewhere between 70 to 75 games without Stephen Curry, and Russell Westbrook.
Okay.
And in those games, his scoring average drops from about 27 points per game to 23, and his field goal percentage drops from being around this. I think last season he shot 53.7% from the field and 37.5% from three. When he plays without Stephen Curry and Russell Westbrook, his field goal percentage drops to about 46%, and his 3-point percentage drops from about 38 to 35. So
wow,
I think that what's a little bit overstated about Kevin Durant is that while I do believe that he's a phenomenal scorer. There's no question about it. Like he's a fantastic talent, but he's really not that. He's not the efficient scorer that all of us, he's not the same like efficient scorer in the sense of other like Carl Anthony Towns. He's a big man, but still like LeBron is 55% from the field, 57% when he was in Miami. Kevin Durant is an amazing scorer, and some of that has to do with the fact that he's more of a jump shooter, but he's really not. He's not elitely efficient. He's an efficient scorer, but he's not a supremely efficient scorer, which I think is an interesting point, just because of those drop-offs when he's not playing with a point guard who attracts so much attention.
oh definitely, and it's. I think your point on him being the leader of the offense is fantastic because I think there's a lot of parallels between him being out now and like what happened in the 15-16 season when the leader of the defense, Draymond Green, went out, and I'd be very curious to see how it would hold up now with Kevin Durant because I think he might get overhyped a lot on defense just because of the system that he's playing in.
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah, okay, so I think that's it. Oh yeah, there's and one more thing on the Warriors. It seems like they were doing a point guard by committee between Sean Livingston and Quinn Cook. I know Sean Livingston. He's like above average, but how was Quinn Cook?
He's okay as he doesn't really produce that much. He averages maybe I think like last night I think he had 3 points, 4 points. He's nothing fantastic.
Okay. So yeah, that's about all we've got on the Warriors right there. Let's see who else.
And one moment, Ryan, I have to head downstairs for just like 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure thing. Ryan, you should edit this out. You should edit this out. Okay. What? Oh. What am I going to talk about next? First one. Oh, jeez. You really knocked that door.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay. What game do you want to go on to next?
Let's see. We can discuss. I had a few more points about Kevin Durant, if you didn't mind.
Oh yeah. Okay, I'll stick with that then. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But yeah, Kevin Durant is definitely a fantastic player. He's incredibly interesting, just being like one of the longest players in the league. He's so tall. He's one of the best shooters, despite being 7 feet tall, or 6'11", if you believe what NBA.com says.
Yeah, he's one of the. I think he's a generational talent. I truly believe that what's interesting about having a player like Kevin Durant in the league is that when Michael Jordan was dominating the league, and even when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was dominating the league, and Magic Johnson, there was never really like a player who I think was you could compare them to in the same way that we can compare LeBron and Kevin Durant. But I think the difference between Kevin Durant and LeBron James, like I mentioned earlier, is the fact that the elevating of different teammates. And also, I think even though the debate is pretty heavy nowadays about whether or not Kevin Durant is better than LeBron James, while I do believe Kevin Durant is a better pure scorer,
Yes.
and definitely a better shooter, I think LeBron is able to do something that is very, very uncommon for an individual player to be able to do, and that is slowing down the pace of games.
Yeah.
Because when you watch teams like the Memphis Grizzlies, when they've been pretty good in the past year, when they were good, like 3 years ago and even 2 years ago.
Rip Grizzlies.
The Grizzlies are able to, when they were the grit and grind team, with Zach Randolph and Mike Conley healthy and Marc Gasol still closer to his prime and all that stuff, they were able to slow down the pace of games to the point where you could make a game about like high 80s and low 90s rather than being like high 120s and low 110s. And when you notice LeBron James playing, he is able to do that as an individual player, because even though the Cavaliers, since he's been back, they've been like a jump shooting team and they play fast with a high pace. Anytime the situation is called for him to play in a game, in a situation when the other team is just as good, if not better, than the Cavaliers at doing that, he can slow the pace down and sort of bring it back to earth. So he can sort of operate in a half court situation, which I think we saw in the Christmas Day game this season with the Warriors playing them 92-99, and there were some controversial foul calls at the end of that game that obviously changed the outcome a little bit. But even in Game 7 of the 2016 NBA Finals, the final score when they won the championship, the final score was only 89-93, and that game was stalemated at 89 for the last 5 minutes of that game. And then in the Boston series last season 2017, those are some low scoring games as well. I think in the first game they held Boston to somewhere like around like 80 points or something.
I don't even remember, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't remember that either. But like the Spurs as a team are able to do that. The Grizzlies as a team are able to do that. But because LeBron James, I feel like LeBron James is, even in his 15th season, being 33 years old, I think he's still more capable of affecting the outcome of a game more than Kevin Durant. I know people love to say that whole thing about how LeBron can't do this in the fourth quarter. You don't trust LeBron with the ball at the end. Like, I would rather have the ball in Kevin Durant's hands than LeBron at the end of the game, because he can make a shot, and LeBron, you're not always sure if he can make a shot. If it's coming down to one like individual shot, like from three, then yeah, okay, I guess I agree. But in terms of the last few minutes of the game, like 5 minutes of a close game, I would rather have LeBron, just because he can control the game more than I think Kevin Durant can, because this was evidenced in these past two games against the Timberwolves and the Trailblazers, is that especially this Timberwolves game just now, this game was only, the spread was 6 points. And at the end of the game, even though Kevin Durant was making shots every trip down, like, even though he's capable of taking over a game just in terms of his scoring, he can't really change the way that a game is played in the same sense that LeBron does. And also, just if you just look at statistically, like, Kevin Durant averages 26 and 5 assists, and LeBron averages 26, close to 27, and 9 assists. So, and then obviously the defense debate is, as of right now, that's swayed in Kevin Durant's favor. But I think that most people understand that if you've been playing in the NBA for 15 seasons, it's not really fair to expect a defensive presence every single night, because even in the finals, in the playoffs, LeBron does step up his defense to, pretty elite levels, and he's sort of able to recapture what he was doing in Miami when he was an elite defender. I don't think it's fair to expect that from him every single night, and I don't really understand why everyone is so surprised that Kevin Durant is getting closer to him, because Kevin Durant is 28 or 29. He's in his prime. He's only in his, I think, 10th or 11th season, as opposed to being in his 15th.
Yeah.
Like, LeBron has been doing this every single day since he was 18 years old. And I mean, Kevin Durant, obviously, he's been doing it, the past 10, but 5 more years is a lot of impact. So
And like
Yeah,
going back to what you said last week on I think it's a fantastic point that LeBron what he excels at is team defense. I know that's not really shown in his stats this year, but just, he's playing with a bunch of god awful defenders. Let's be honest.
yeah.
And Durant is more of a plug and play defender. Like you can just put him on any team and he'll be a fantastic individual one. So
Mm.
like that kind of evens
Not
out.
necessarily even because when he was in Oklahoma City, he was not really that good a defender. I think it's
Oh, good
honestly, I
point.
think Draymond Green's presence on the Warriors team has a
Oh
like
yeah,
it's sort of and also this is another thing that's not really talked about. Kevin Durant is 7 feet tall. Like if you look at pictures where he's standing next to DeMarcus Cousins and he's standing next to Anthony Davis, like he's taller than them. Like he
and
is
he's a long 7 feet too.
he's a yeah he's and his wingspan I think is 7'5". Like I don't know, I'm not even sure, but the fact is that when you play a player of that size at the center, because now the Warriors play Kevin Durant more at the 5 and 4.
Yeah,
They moved Draymond Green down, so him in a small like obviously if you play him at center, then he's going to be able to block more shots and um, all the stuff about some people love like they love to say like things like out of the however many players who have played this many minutes, LeBron James is ranked this in defensive rating. LeBron James is ranked this in plus minus. But people they love to ignore the fact that those stats are based on your team. Like
yes,
plus minus is the point differential when you are on the floor. It has nothing to do like with individual. Like it's nothing that you can really control individually. And there was a stretch when LeBron James was in like his plus minus was the worst in the league, but the only reason that was is because he's playing the most minutes on the worst defensive team. It has nothing to do with him individually. Like, in January, he didn't play well to his standards, but he was still averaging 23, 24 points, 7 assists, 7 rebounds, which for any other player in the NBA is amazing. And I just think that he's unfairly like he's still even after all that he's done in the league, he's still unfairly criticized in many aspects. I feel like.
oh, definitely. And your point on systems not being accounted for in advanced metrics is a fantastic one. I was going to bring that up later in our advanced metrics discussion, and I'm really curious to see how that goes. But
Yeah.
also around the league, there was an awesome game yesterday between the Spurs and Thunder.
Oh yes, that was. I thought that was very interesting. I'm very, very sad for the Spurs.
Yeah,
This is the first year since 1996, 1997 that they've had a losing record on the road. Um,
yeah.
and it doesn't. Unless they go 13-3 over their last 16 games, then it does not look like they're going to keep their 20-year streak of winning 50 games alive.
Yeah, and I don't think that's happening, so it's going to be a real shame. I'm just crossing my fingers at this point that they make the playoffs because the Clippers are giving them a real run for their money at the bottom.
Yeah, and so I mean, then you also have teams like, you know, Utah is also tied with the Clippers in terms of how many games back they are.
Yeah.
You also have to worry about slippage from the top coming down, and also the thing about the Spurs is that the Spurs they have an absolute hellacious schedule going forward.
Oh
They have
yeah.
to play the Rockets 2 more times. They play the Warriors again.
Yeah, and like
Uh,
the winning percentage for the rest of your schedule, it's equivalent to an average number 4 seed in the playoffs. So that's
yeah,
horrible.
yeah, they have a hellacious schedule going forward. They play, I think, they play the Timberwolves again. They play like the Warriors, like I said. I mean, they play and the Pelicans. They play a few times. The Blazers. They play like they and the Jazz and Bucks and
Wizards.
even the bad teams that they play. Like they're not bad teams. Like
Ooh,
they're
and
still just
Rockets.
they're good teams that just might not make the playoffs. Like they play Denver and they whew, the road for them just might be very very tough. I'm not sure if they'll. I really hope they make the playoffs because the
Yeah.
Spurs because especially with Kawhi Leonard, he's scheduled to come back this Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
So with him coming back, but honestly, it might work to their advantage because, let's say that they actually, I'm not really sure if it would or not. If they can get up to the 6th seed, I think it would work in their advantage because if they're the 6th seed and they're playing with Kawhi Leonard and they, let's say they match up against Portland or New Orleans, they could still get to the second round. Um, you know, and then I think it could be very, very interesting actually from this perspective is that if the San Antonio Spurs they fall to being the 7th seed and they get a first round matchup against the Golden State Warriors, I'm not really sure if the Spurs would win that series, but I think that they could make it extremely difficult
Yes.
for Golden State, and Golden State has not had a tough first round in a very long time. If they have a tough first round series, Golden State's the 2 seed, then they could get their second round matchup. Their second round matchup, or they're still only one game back of Houston, so let's say, like if San Antonio is 8 and Golden State is 1, or Golden State is 2 and San Antonio is 7. Let's say Golden State is 2, then they would play the winner of 3-6, and the winner of 3-6 could be Oklahoma City. Assuming Oklahoma City rounds out the rest of this year, okay.
Yeah.
Having to play, I mean, even though Oklahoma City is a very interesting team because I feel like they just play down to the level of competition. They don't really try on the simpler nights, but against the big teams, Oklahoma City does have a winning record against other playoff teams.
Yeah, and they're a bit like the Steelers from the NFL in that regard. Like they always the Steelers were always playing bad against the Browns, or like they're playing bad against the Bengals. But every time in the playoffs they come to play, despite what happened.
Exactly. I think Oklahoma City is going to be one of those teams that even though you probably wouldn't expect much from them in the playoffs, I feel like they can definitely give you a tough run. So honestly, like if the playoffs started today and it was Portland, Oklahoma City, I would still give Oklahoma City the edge just based on talent and the fact that I feel like Russell Westbrook, Carmelo Anthony, and Paul George for that. I feel like all of them would just be motivated because of the things that have happened to them in terms of their playoff success in recent years. Like Carmelo Anthony, I don't think he's played in a playoff since 2013.
Yeah.
And then Paul George and Carmelo Anthony is one of those players who, like, even though he's past his prime, he's still one of those players who's very capable of going off for one game. He can probably give you maybe like a high 20s or maybe even a low 30s game for one game in a series. Paul George obviously capable of that as well. Russell Westbrook is constantly doing that.
Yeah.
So if Golden State's road to the finals ends up being San Antonio, Oklahoma City, and then Houston, which is possible if San Antonio gets a low seed, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they play in the finals because the one year that they had a tough time getting out of the West in 2016 was the only year that they lost. So
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point. And I would be curious to see how much Russell Westbrook would really let Carmelo Anthony go off. I don't know how much he has this season, but it seems like he's very dominating with the ball, and I know he was when Kevin Durant was around. But the Western Conference playoff picture has been fascinating so far this season. I was listening to the Lab, and apparently the 3 through 10 seeds, the fact that they're all 4.5, actually 4 games separated, like in terms of games back for at this point in the season, that has literally never happened in NBA history. So
yeah, 4 games separating 3 through 10, which is honestly that to me that's ridiculous because it eliminates the entire, in my opinion, it eliminates the entire factor of resting
yes,
the playoffs for the because typically, like, this is also I think the first, like, this is I think one of the first years that the East has clinched a playoff spot before a team in the West because
oh,
Toronto and Boston have already clinched, and
yeah, that would make sense because the West is just beating itself up, and I'm gonna be really sad for whoever's the 9 through 10 seed because they've all really deserved it this year. But one of the reasons the lab gave for why the 3 through 10 seeds are so bunched up is they thought it was because of all the injuries to the contenders, and that's made all of the teams really regress to like a lower winning potential.
yeah.
But the only team that I really feel like doesn't deserve the playoffs at this point is the Clippers, just because they traded away Blake Griffin. It seemed like that was a tanking move, and I don't want a situation like in the MLB where the Twins basically traded away their closer and one of their best starting pitchers, and then they still made the wild card game. So yeah, that's just how I feel about the playoff picture. I can't imagine who's going to fall off. Either the Jazz, Nuggets, Spurs, heck, Thunder, Timberwolves, really any of them. But the playoff matchups are looking fascinating right now. We've got Rockets, Clippers, Spurs, Warriors, Trailblazers, Thunder, Timberwolves, Pelicans. Which series would you be most excited for if it stayed as it is?
The series that I would be most excited for if the playoffs started today would have to be New Orleans, Minnesota, because New Orleans, I would love to see Anthony Davis and Karl Anthony Towns because go against each other because I think those two players are the future of the Western Conference. Just in terms of the direction that it's heading. Because I feel like there's a little bit of a revival of big men in the NBA.
Yeah.
Just because of, you got Joel Embiid, you've got Karl Anthony Towns, you've got Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins. He's a little bit older, but still. And then Lauri Markkanen is an amazing underrated player.
Oh, I forgot about him.
Kristaps Porzingis, forgot about him. He tore his ACL, but
poor guy.
he is like there's a lot of really good young big men, and then we've got DeAndre Ayton coming up in this draft. I just think that series would be a little bit of a tease for the future, and also I just feel like it would be a little bit more favorable for Anthony Davis to finally win a playoff game against a team like Minnesota, if unless because if he had to play a team like let's say that if New Orleans in the next few games slips and they end up being a 7 or 8 seed, I feel like they would probably get swept by Houston and Golden State.
Yeah.
And that would continue the haters of Anthony Davis love to say like, oh, he's never won a playoff game. He's been in the league for like 5, 6 years now or whatever.
That's the worst point I've ever heard.
Yeah,
It's such a bad team.
Skip Bayless, the one and only, he said Anthony Davis, he just has empty calorie numbers because he's never won a playoff game, as though any player in NBA history has been able. Oh, well, unless you're LeBron James.
Empty
LeBron is probably
calories.
the only player who's won a playoff game with a supporting cast as bad or worse than that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like because the other series I feel like would be relatively predictable. Because Houston and the Clippers, if they started today, I feel like everyone's pretty confident. That was the only reason that would be interesting is because of the whole Houston Los Angeles drama with Chris Paul going into the locker room and that kind of thing. And then Golden State San Antonio, I feel like we've seen it a couple times. It would be a good series. I just don't think it would be as exciting. Portland and Oklahoma City, that would also be interesting, but just because of I feel like every other matchup is guard centric because Houston you would have like Harden and Paul going against like Lou Williams and Milos Teodosic. Golden State and San Antonio, that would actually be small forward centric. It'd be Kawhi and Kevin Durant. But Portland OKC would be like Dame and CJ against Paul George and Russell Westbrook. But New Orleans and Minnesota would be interesting in my opinion because the best player on both teams, well, depending on how you view Jimmy Butler, but either the first or second best player on the team would be big men. And I think that would just be something that we haven't seen in the playoffs in a while.
Yeah, and that's a good point about the construction of almost every team in the league right now. Like they're all based around point guards and shooting guards, and it was really only the Pelicans and who else? Like maybe Timberwolves, Spurs, and like that. That's pretty much it for like teams that are really based around big men. Like it's all just guard centric right now, and I think that's something that a lot of front offices are realizing that they can exploit.
Yeah, I think the one thing is that, like, just going off of your point about how big men are sort of, Ben Simmons, despite the fact that Ben Simmons is technically a point guard, I feel like Joel Embiid is at this point in time. I feel like he's a little bit better of a player, just because he's able to dominate, like in terms of, because he can shoot a little bit from the outside. So I as of right, I don't think Joel. I think in the long term, I feel like Ben Simmons will end up being a better player because Ben Simmons is able to play point guard and he's able to have such mismatches at his position because he's so tall and he's so strong. But as of right now, I would prefer Joel Embiid. So you've got Philadelphia that's around Embiid. You've got the Knicks who are around Porzingis. You've got Denver who's around Jokic. You've got New Orleans that's around AD. And then you've got San Antonio who's around LaMarcus. And then you have Minnesota who's around Karl Anthony Towns. So yeah, as of right now, you only have about like 5 or 6 teams, and then a few of those teams don't even matter because Denver might not make the playoffs, and we know New York's not going to make the playoffs. So It is very interesting. I think what would really benefit some of a team that really is like the thing about Philadelphia, like if LeBron James is to go there, and then you really like you're sort of dabbling in this whole thing about how you have a really good big man and a really good guard in Ben Simmons, and you have a really good wing in LeBron James. I don't think there's a single team in the league that has a very good big man, a very good point guard, and a very good wing. And for that, I really don't even feel like there's that many teams that have a very good point guard and a very good big.
Yeah.
Because like all the best point guards don't play with very good big men. Like Damian Lillard doesn't, Russell Westbrook doesn't. I guess Kyrie Irving, Al Horford would be the closest thing to it, but Al Horford I don't think is. He's only averaging 13 points and like 6 rebounds at this point in his career. So
yeah, and like a lot of the really good teams right now in the West, like the Rockets and Warriors, that they either aren't true big men or like they aren't true guards. Like that Clint Capella, he's basically just you toss it to him, he'll put it in the bucket. And then the Warriors, I don't think anyone would call Draymond Green or Kevin Durant like a prototypical center.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that's a lot on the West. Did you say you watched any games in the East?
I would love to talk about Toronto.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They're really, really impressing me. Honestly, I know everybody says that the knock on Toronto is that they never show up in the playoffs or the postseason, but I'm not sure what it is. But for some reason this year, I feel like it's just a little bit different because when Toronto was winning, those 50, like this 50 win, they're on pace to win 60 games, which I think is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they they sort of did like a Spurs thing. Like they kept all the same players in their starting lineup. They added a few good bench players, and they just changed their system to be free flowing. And they've seen such an increase in their production because of it. They're the only team in the league other than Golden State that's top five in offense and defense, which I think is a phenomenal metric of how good that they've been on both sides of the ball. And to me, like just when you watch them play, they just look as though that they can actually beat you in the sense of the way that the other team can beat you as well. Because Toronto, in my opinion, in the past years, out of the top teams in the league, like they've been around like Cleveland, Boston, Golden State, Houston, San Antonio. The one thing about Toronto that was different than those other teams was that Toronto was extremely isolation heavy in terms of like if DeMar DeRozan or Kyle Lowry were not in the game like to play well, like if they had a bad game, if both of them had a bad game, you were done. Like there was no chance. But now that they've put so much more faith in players like Serge Ibaka, Jonas Valanciunas, Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam, CJ Miles, they've really rounded out into being a really deep team that actually, they know how to play like winning basketball now. They're a better three-point shooting team this year. They're a better defensive team. They're playing at a faster pace. I just think that the year all around feels a little bit different for Toronto because, I mean, the fact that they snapped Houston's 17-game win streak I thought was a really big test for them because Houston obviously was coming in hot. And they played them to a close game. James Harden had 40 points and they only won by 3, but they were able to grind it out and win, which I think is a very good sign for them.
Yeah, definitely. How much do you feel like they'd be able to use their bench in the playoffs? Because I know that's one of their really strong points.
I don't know. I know that a lot of lineups get thin in the playoffs, but I feel like Toronto is they're probably going to be one of the deeper playoff teams. They're probably, if I were to say, if I were just to going off the top of my head who I would play off the bench for them, I would definitely play C.J. Miles, Fred VanVleet. I think Pascal Siakam is on the bench, so I would probably play those three, and then I think there's one player that's not coming to me, Norman Powell. I would probably play those 4 off the bench, but I would still probably leave 38 minutes, 39 minutes for DeRozan, Lowry, Ibaka.
Yeah, I would think you would have to. Who do you think would be the worst matchup for that team? Like someone like this.
Toronto, interestingly enough to me, because we were just speaking about them, I feel like the Philadelphia 76ers would be a
Yeah, I was
horrible
gonna say.
because Kyle Lowry is good, but he's 6 foot. He's 6'1", and he would be playing matchup. He'd be matched up with Ben Simmons, which would be hellacious. And then you have Jonas Valanciunas, who I think never really grew to the way that people thought he would in the league against Joel Embiid. And then on the wings, like DeRozan is good, but he in the Eastern Conference, he has a little bit of a benefit of not having played against the best defenders, and he would be playing a full series matched up with Robert Covington and Ben Simmons guarding him.
Yeah, that'd be brutal.
Which would be brutal and especially because he can't shoot the 3. It would be a horrible I just feel like it would just be a clunky series for him to have to go inside and guard against those tall, long players. However, favorable matchup, I really feel like the Raptors could. I feel like the Raptors are a pretty good matchup to go against Cleveland because if you take it other than LeBron, like the Raptors can match up with any other player on that team because, I'm saying because Kevin Love will be back, but Kevin Love I don't feel like is good enough to take over a series.
Yeah.
So Serge Ibaka on him. Serge Ibaka is still a pretty good defender, even though he's dwindled a little bit. He can probably do some damage against Kevin Love. So I think that Toronto the fact that their guard play would destroy Cleveland's guard play, I think is going to be very interesting if those two teams meet. And even the Celtics, you have one guard on Boston, and since Gordon Hayward is not coming back, I feel like Toronto could dispose of Boston in probably a 6-game series.
Yeah, I think so too. And like even if they were matched up against someone like the Bucks, like we saw him with that one last year, and I'm not confident that this is a better Bucks team this year.
Yeah, it's not. That's been one of the more disappointing spots of this season to me because people keep saying things like, or not that many people, but there are a few people out there who believe that Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to be the next best player in the league. And I mean, while I do see his talent and I do see all these things that people are saying about him, he sort of has that same problem that we were mentioning earlier with Kevin Durant, where despite how talented and good he is, he just doesn't seem to elevate teammates.
Yeah.
Um, which is weird to me because I know he's Jason Kidd played him at point guard a little bit back when he was the coach, but still, I think Toronto this year is. I think they're much. I feel like the only team in the East that could really beat Toronto is. I think the Sixers could beat them, and I think the Cavs could beat them. But otherwise, I think Toronto really is. I really think. I feel like if Cleveland was not, if Cleveland did not have, if Cleveland didn't make the moves at the trade deadline, I think Toronto would be a clear favorite to win the East.
Yeah, I think so as well. Uh, do you think the Pistons have any chance of getting back into the picture, or are they just done?
I would have to call them out for the season. I don't know what it is. They just don't seem to play motivated. They don't seem to really care that the Blake Griffin is gone. And at this point in the season, I think they're only about on average like 16 to 17, 18 games left in the season. And Detroit, the difference between the East and the West this year is that the 3 through 10 is close in the East. I mean, 3 through 10 is close in the West, but in the East, it's only close from 4 to 8. And after 8, the next closest team, which is Detroit, is 5 games back. So it looks like the playoff teams in the West, in the Eastern Conference, are set. So right now it goes Toronto, Boston, Cleveland, Indiana, Washington, Philadelphia, Miami, Milwaukee. And I feel like that's actually, like the only team I think that people thought would make the playoffs that maybe didn't. I feel like maybe some people doubted, because I think when New York still had Kristaps Porzingis, they were playing about 500 basketball. So some people thought that they might be able to make it into the playoffs and maybe take out a team like Miami, who still doesn't really have a really, really good player.
Yeah, unless Dwayne Wade wants to take over the playoffs again.
Yeah, like the one year in 2016, that was phenomenal to watch. But right now, I think it's interesting. The playoff matches in the East would be Toronto, Milwaukee, like we just said, Boston, Miami, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Indiana, Washington. I think it'll probably end up changing a little bit because, Indiana is only a half game back of Cleveland, and then Philadelphia is only a game and a half back of Washington. Washington is only half a game behind Indiana. Miami's only half a game behind Philadelphia, and Milwaukee's only half a game behind Miami. So I think the teams that are in the Eastern Conference are all going to make the current playoff teams in the East. I think are set. I just think that the order will change up a bit. I think Milwaukee probably will come up to 7, and then Miami will probably fall to 8. I think Philadelphia will probably stay at 6. I think, yeah, and I think Washington will probably move up to 4. So that will probably be the 4-5 matchup will be the same, but it'll just be in a reverse order, and Washington will have home court advantage because John Wall's still coming back. So.
Yeah, I know that one of my more controversial points on that initial podcast was that the Wizards would fall off. Why do you think they've been able to hold up so well without John Wall?
I honestly think that it's because I know a lot of people accredit it to Bradley Beal's good play, which I think obviously is a part of it. But I really feel like the one thing about point guards in the NBA is that just because you get a lot of assists doesn't mean that you're a good facilitator of the basketball. It means you're a good assist man, but it doesn't really mean that you're like it doesn't mean that you benefit ball movement, because there are some point guards in the league, and I think Rajon Rondo was one of the first players to get really scrutinized for this, is that they pass to assist rather than to pass to pass.
Yeah.
Like they don't pass to initiate ball movement. Like they pass in order to they pass just to get the ball for an assist. Like they don't pass to start a chain of ball movement, which I think the one thing that has made the Spurs so successful is, ever since they've been good, is that the Spurs have never really had one player who is responsible for a majority of the assists. Like they always have a really good balance. Like since 2016, I don't think any player on the Spurs has averaged over 3 assists, and it's because they have 8 players averaging 2 or more, which ends up, facilitating a lot more ball movement. Because I think a player like John Wall, despite his talent, even his own teammate Marcin Gortat called him out and said, "We're playing such good team basketball since they've been gone." And I think it's because you have less ego on the team now that John Wall is there, so they're moving the ball a lot more. And I think their offense is just so much more fluid. And I think that's the reason that they've been able to sustain a high level of play even without him.
Yeah, and that's a good point about passing to assists. Like if you look at some of Rondo's games where he gets like 2 points and then 25 assists, you can tell that he's just holding the ball, waiting for an opportunity to get a basket.
Yeah, and I think that's also been a criticism of Chris Paul, where Chris Paul would just continually dribble the ball and look for an assist. Obviously, that's changed this season now that he's played with James Harden. But in the past, I wouldn't say I agree with the criticism because Chris Paul, I think, he's one of my favorite players in the league. But he could have been guilty of that, a few seasons.
Yeah, definitely. So and that's the East playoff picture, and then that's the West playoff picture. Has there been any interesting news within the past week? Let's see.
Derrick Rose ripped his haters. He
Good
said
for
that he does
him.
not need their validation and that he doesn't care whether they say he can't play, can't shoot.
Yeah. Oh wait, I'm seeing. Is everything right with Iguodala?
Andre Iguodala, I don't know what his deal is, but for some reason he hasn't played. I haven't seen him on the court in a while.
That's interesting. Looks like Anthony Davis is recovering pretty well from his injury. James Harden should be fine with his. Yeah, it's pretty much it for news around the league. So, do you want to switch to some talking points?
Sure.
Okay, so something that I was hearing in the lab, which is basically just my way of getting a rundown on like all the stuff that's happened in the past week of the NBA. It's put out by 538.com. And one of the interesting things was I was hearing about Gary Harris, the guard for the Denver Nuggets, and apparently in his first 4 seasons, his stat line is almost identical to that of Kawhi Leonard's first 4 seasons. They're literally within a tenth of a point on points, rebounds, assists, and blocks for every one of their first 4 seasons. So that's pretty incredible.
I think that's very interesting. And I was watching. I told you I was watching that Cleveland game against the Nuggets, and one of the commentators mentioned that he could be the next Kawhi Leonard. I think Gary Harris will end up being a very good two-way player, but the only thing that I don't think he'll be Kawhi Leonard simply because he's a shooting guard that's 6'4", as opposed to being a small forward that's 6'7". Because I mean, let's face it, even though Kawhi Leonard is a fantastic defender, he's obviously helped by the fact that he's 6'7" with a very strong frame. I think Gary Harris is one of the more underrated young players in the league, and I think this is an interesting point as well about the Denver Nuggets as a team in general. Is that they last season, after the Nuggets traded Yusuf Nurkic to the Portland Trailblazers and they made Nikola Jokic their full-time starter. This was in December of 2016. After that trade and after moving Jokic to the starting lineup permanently, the Denver Nuggets were the number one offensive team ahead of both Houston and Golden State last year.
Yeah.
And that is something that I don't think enough people talk about. And when I was reading something that I thought was very interesting about the Denver Nuggets, which was that Denver's rebuild, since getting rid of Carmelo Anthony, is all that they have been the team who has constructed their new team in the way that's most similar to Golden State, in that they, rather than tanking and getting an extremely high draft pick, they've always played marginally well, and then
but they've lucked out.
Get really good draft picks, in the later rounds, and then get later lottery draft picks. Because if you look at it, like Nikola Jokic is their second round draft pick, which resembles what happened with Draymond Green.
Yeah.
Gary Harris was their 19th pick in 2014, which resembles what they did with Klay Thompson, and then you have the 7th pick in Jamal Murray, which resembles what they got with Stephen Curry. And I'm not saying Jamal Murray is going to be Steph Curry, but just in the way that Denver has constructed their team, I read some people, and because they are such an offensive juggernaut already, I would not be surprised if Denver did something similar to Golden State, which is just bringing in a new coach, and then they just completely rise through the roof and end up being a team that's like Golden State, because offensively they can play just as well as Golden State. And I'm not saying that to exaggerate, but like, they really can. Like, just in terms of the numbers they put up and the shooting that they have, if they were a good defensive team, Denver would be a terrifying force in the Western Conference.
Yeah. And I'd be very curious to see like the actual data on this. I know we couldn't just say subjectively, but if teams that just are always getting the number one overall picks every year and like they're getting like the average return on that, if they are more commonly NBA champions versus teams that have like the Warrior style where you luck out on a second round pick, you luck out on a bunch of mid range picks. Because the tanking model obviously is predicated on the former being true, but I'd say it's probably about half and half.
Honestly, just if you look at recently, I feel like it's been more like the latter, like we were just talking about, because the Spurs obviously have always been doing that, where they just kind of get late. And well, Tim Duncan, I guess that they're sort of cheating because they kind of did both.
Yeah.
They did the Tim Duncan thing, and then they also did like the Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker thing. But a team like Golden State has done that recently. The last champion that wasn't Golden State or Cleveland was San Antonio. Before that, it was Miami. We haven't seen. And then obviously there's some teams that built through trade. The
Yeah,
last
built for
team
free
I think
agency.
that we saw that wasn't like it was the 2004 Pistons, because every team since then has either been a super team or a team that had a very high draft pick and traded for another star.
Yeah, the Pistons are such an aberration in general. Like they didn't even have an All NBA first team member.
Yeah, and they didn't have I think Chauncey Billups was their best player, averaging like 20 points, 5 assists, something like that.
Yeah, outside of Ben Walls.
Yeah, that was he wasn't even drafted. Oh, one moment, Ryan, I'm getting a call. Yeah, it's upstairs.
I wonder who he's getting a call from. I'll have to ask. Who
Just
was it?
Just my mother.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, but the Pistons were an aberration. But I don't know. I'm watching out for Denver. I don't think it would be a bad idea for people to get some Denver Nuggets gear before they get really good. Because when Nikola Jokic comes around, and I really feel like they're going to be scary.
Yeah, no kidding. And like it's really weird. I was going back and looking through the market share for like all of the NBA teams, and even still this year, the Nuggets are one of the lowest, and I think that's absolutely ridiculous. I think they've actually declined from last year, which I couldn't understand at all. So yeah, if we can get some more fans for the Nuggets, that would help out a lot.
And also, I think it has to do a lot with the fact that when Golden State was doing this, they were still making the playoffs because the West wasn't as good. Like they were getting in as like a 6 seed, winning the same amount of games that Denver is now. But because the West has gotten so much better with the top teams being so top heavy and winning so many games, that it's been difficult for them to make an impact. I think if they got into the playoffs as a low seed, people would see it a little bit more. But that seems like it might not even happen this year. So
yeah, and one other point on Gary Harris and the Nuggets. Apparently, the Gary Harris to Nikola Jokic and the Nikola Jokic to Gary Harris combination, it's literally the most efficient scoring duo in the league, and they have the same effective field goal percentage as Clint Capella's. So that's
ridiculous.
Yeah, that's nuts. I think it's like 61% or something, which is just out of this world. Do you think Gary Harris or Drew Holiday is going to have a better career?
Honestly, by this point, because Drew Holiday's been, I think he's been in the league since 2010 or 2011, right?
Yeah.
I think I would have to give it to Gary Harris, just because he seems like he has more to do. I mean, just Drew Holiday he's been one of the more underappreciated talents in the league. But at the end of the day,
You know what you're getting.
He doesn't seem to he can't stay healthy. Like, it's just very unfortunate. Since he's been in New Orleans, first season he was in New Orleans, he played 34 games. Then the next season he played 40. The next season he played 65, but he only started 23. And then last season he played 67. He really has been, like, ever since he's been traded to New Orleans from Philadelphia, like, he's really had some trouble. He was an all-star in 2013 with Philadelphia. He averaged 18 points, 8 assists, 4 rebounds. But I mean, the positive side about Drew Holiday is that he is becoming a better shooter. He's been about the same throughout his whole career. He's a 36% three-point shooter. Last season, he had averaged 15 points a game, 7 assists, 4 rebounds on 45% shooting. I'm not sure what his averages are this year, but Drew Holiday, the thing with him is that I just feel like it's too late in his career to say that he's going to end up having a really nice one, because he's already 27 years old.
Yeah, and
like 28 this June.
And I do wonder if like there's anything that those really bad not really bad teams. Well, I was going to say that sorry, it was because I was trying to hunt down this live stream and I accidentally popped on the 76ers and Nets game. Now with those players that have really bad injury rates, like if there's anything that they can even do, because like even today when like we're investing so much money in medical research and trying to find every way to keep players healthy. Still seems like players like Anthony Davis and like just these really injured players. There's just nothing they can do.
And what's interesting to me about it is like even a player like Stephen Curry, like his injury history, I don't think is talked about enough because it seems like every year Steph Curry always seems to have some issue with his ankles. Like this season he's already missed 17 games, and that is not that like it doesn't seem like it because the Warriors have been so good, but 17 games is a huge sample size. Like I mean, they're not huge, but it's like if any other team was missing their first or second best player for 17 games, like the Warriors are the only team with the luxury to not struggle like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Because even Houston struggled when James Harden was gone and when Chris Paul was gone. Like when both of them were gone, I don't think they won a game if both of them had been gone.
Yeah, and
they're like 33-3. So
I don't want to be the guy to say this, but I'm kind of expecting Embiid to get hurt one of these years.
yeah, that's one of my main worries, and that's one of the things that I heard the guy that I mentioned earlier, Chris Broussard. I heard him say this as well, and he said the decision for LeBron's free agency will come down to what he trusts more. Does he trust Chris Paul's health more, or Chris Paul's age, or Joel Embiid's health? Like it comes down to does he think that Chris Paul will really deteriorate with age like every other point guard has, or does he think that Joel Embiid was able to stay healthy? Because Joel Embiid, just 7-footers with leg issues, like they have never historically had a good time in the NBA. Like got Yao Ming, and then obviously Greg Oden, and the list for that goes on and on.
Yeah,
I'm so worried. I'm so worried about DeMarcus Cousins' Achilles. I really hope that doesn't hinder the rest of his career.
And with the big thing with it, as I mentioned in our All-Star special, is just there's only been one center in the entire league's history that's come back from it, and that's Dominique Wilkins, and he was a lot younger than DeMarcus Cousins is right now, and there's like 13 others that have been way worse when they came back.
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh, I really hope he's good. I was so excited for the Pelicans, and thank God they've been able to keep it up. But I don't know how much longer it's going to last. Anthony Davis has been otherworldly right now.
And also, just Anthony Davis, just him putting this much pressure on himself to do all these sorts of things is part of the reason why he's obviously had some lingering injuries show up. Like he had that rib issue, he had the ankle issue just recently, and thankfully for the Pelicans, they've been small, but I really think that at this point they should consider playing him less minutes, just because I feel like it's much more important to preserve his health until DeMarcus Cousins comes back next season, rather than trying to force a playoff push to lose in the first round this season.
Yeah, definitely.
But DeMarcus Cousins is a free agent. That's something that people haven't really explored, but he really seems to enjoy his time in New Orleans. I genuinely hope that he re-signs with New Orleans, and then New Orleans can go out and acquire a quality guard to pair with them. Because if New Orleans gets a quality guard, like someone who's better than Rajon Rondo and Drew Holiday, they would be extremely, extremely dangerous.
Oh, that's not good. Did you hear that?
What up?
Oh, no, I was just getting a vast warning saying a threat has been detected. Okay, I'm getting off this website. Okay, we're just going to roll with the Nets 76ers. I don't want to get a virus. Okay. So I think that's about all we have on that. Do you want to move on to some of like not playoff projections, just playoff outlooks and like why our favorite teams are the favorite teams that they are?
Sure.
Okay, so I know that your favorite team right now is the 76ers. Why is that?
They're my favorite. My team that I root for is the Timberwolves, but the team that I'm supporting, like the team that I look out for in the East, is the 76ers. The reason for the Sixers, I think, is that it's just we have not seen a combination like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid in a very long time. To have a point guard that's so tall and so versatile, and to have a center, like I think Joel Embiid, like I truly think that simply because of the way that he plays on both sides of the ball, I think he's the best center in the NBA. Now that DeMarcus Cousins is out, and that's if you don't count Anthony Davis as a center. If you count Anthony Davis as a center, then I think it's Anthony Davis. But if you don't, then I think it's Joel Embiid, because even though I have a lot of love for Karl Anthony Towns, him being on my team and everything,
he just doesn't have as much potential.
He's not the player on the defensive side of the ball. Just in terms of block shots, I know his advanced metrics are very good, but I think a lot of that has to do with him benefiting from the fact that Jimmy Butler has been there all year to help
100%.
Yeah, and just individually, I don't think Karl Anthony Towns is the defender that Joel Embiid is. So simply because I think after LeBron is done, I feel like Ben Simmons has a chance to be one of, if not the best player at the league, because he will be the most unique player in the league. Because he'll be the only 7 foot point guard. He'll be the only point guard that can go out there and grab like 10 rebounds a game and get close to averaging a triple double. Um, you know, unless you're Skip Bayless, because Skip Bayless believes Lonzo Ball will average a triple double. Um,
I'm so glad that I stopped listening to Skip and Shannon. I listened to that podcast for like 6 months, and I always hated it, but I felt like I needed to listen to it just to have like some kind of feed for like what's going on in sports. And I'm so glad I'm not listening to it anymore. It's like it's so simple to see what they're doing. Like they're just trying to both be polarized, take the most extreme versions of each side, so that someone's going to so it's going to force like a conflict, and even like the most simple things are it's just going to do that, and like
yeah, it's not like a legitimate debate involving like actual because like if you think about it, like some like Shannon Sharp will say one thing that Skip Bayless could, or no, other way around. Skip Bayless easily says something that Shannon Sharp could so easily refute and
oh
put down.
wow, sorry,
Doesn't.
Embiid just had a great block.
Oh yeah, Joel Embiid. But yeah, oh yeah. But, we're talking about Embiid, so this fits perfectly. I just because of their combination, that is why I think they're the most intriguing thing in the East, because they're also surrounded by players who are 3 and D guys like Dario Saric, Robert Covington. I think at Philadelphia, and they have JJ Redick as well. He's not much of a 3 and D. He's more of just a three, but
Yeah.
he can obviously shoot the ball. They have I don't know. I just think Philadelphia they're intriguing simply because of their uniqueness, and they're also one of the bigger teams. And the one thing that I've heard a lot about LeBron potentially going there is that if LeBron were to go there, their front line of Simmons, LeBron, and Embiid would be unstoppable and unguardable.
Yeah, pretty much. And I really wish more people would talk about the value of reach in the NBA, because like the 76ers, not only being one of the biggest teams, they're also one of the longest teams, with the exception of Redick, who perpetually is like the smallest reach in the NBA. He's 6'3", but he has like a 6 foot reach, and that's why they always try and get him to play point guard or something instead of shooting guard. But I feel like that's never talked about enough with that's never talked enough about when you're talking about centers, because like if you look at players like Draymond Green and Taj Gibson, they're really good because of really what they can do for just what am I trying to say? So like, if you look at Draymond Green, he's a 6'8" tall.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Oh, I'm sorry. What is going on here? Oh,
Yeah, I couldn't hear you.
hang on a second. Do you have your sound on? All right. Yeah, I think you had your sound on.
Yeah, for some reason I couldn't hear you. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying, did you hear the part about JJ Redick?
Yeah, my JJ Redick is just more of a 3 point shooting guy. He's not really a defensive guy, but still, that's the main reason why I find Philadelphia so interesting.
Yeah, and JJ Redick just has the Sammy Haynes problem with basketball, having short arms. But yeah, that's just
Love Sam Haynes.
yeah,
If
poor
he's
guy.
listening, shout out to him. Love Sam Haynes.
Yeah, but like it's so important. Ooh, it's sweet. We got a Masai Ujiri commercial. Good for him. Now one of the biggest problems with how we look at centers is we always just say, "Ooh, is he 7'2"? Is he 7 feet tall?" But nobody talks about how long their arms are. And if you look at players like Taj Gibson or Draymond Green, I think Taj Gibson has like a 7 foot two reach. Draymond, I just checked, he had like a 7'1". That's why they're able to play center. And like even if they're short, it doesn't matter because they could just stick their arms up in the air and have the same length as some of these other centers. And I really wish they would. I really wish they would just classify players based on their reach instead of their height. I mean, height doesn't matter. You're not trying to hit the guy with your head.
Height, I think, because even in terms of rebounding, like Taj Gibson has always been a really good rebounder. So is Draymond Green. The most, and like even Kevin Durant is not a physical player at all, but because he's so long,
Yeah, 7'5".
He's able to grab 7 to 8 rebounds a game. If Kevin Durant had some meat on him and really wanted to play center, he could be pretty deadly.
Oh, yeah.
But I agree with that testament. Like Draymond Green is one of the best defenders because of his reach. Kawhi Leonard also. I'm not sure how long LeBron James' wingspan is, but I feel like
don't think it is that long.
if it is long, I think that there's a unique option in Cleveland of playing him at center when they're not playing with Nance or Love in the lineup.
Yeah, here, let me see real quick. LeBron, this is just going back to his draft, 6'7.5", wingspan of 7 feet. So, yeah, a good 5 inches. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that. I mean, even yeah, that was a long time. I'm not sure if his arms have grown in the past 15 years, but still.
Yeah. And here, I'm curious to see now what Darko Milicic's is. Oh, he actually had a pretty good wingspan, too, 7'5". Yeah.
Darko Milicic is he. That was a weird thing about that was I love to call it Dirk syndrome because I feel like a lot of teams have made the mistake of drafting European big men because they thought they would be like Dirk.
Yeah, they missed the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I asked you why the Timberwolves and the 76ers were your favorite teams, so I thought I would get into why I have the favorite teams today too, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand why like I have my favorite teams. So what I prioritize in like the teams that I like is I want to root for my primary goal in sports is to root for every team to get at least one championship. Like that's my biggest thing because I feel like you have to get that to that point before you can really start looking at all the other teams because that's terrible for like one team to have never won the whole shebang. Like even if you're talking about like a team like the Kings, well, you won in the '50s, you have a trophy. So, so that's basically how I feel about it. But I took the liberty this week of making a giant spreadsheet because I was sick of having like arbitrary ways of determining this. So I created for the NBA. I created the criteria 1 NBA Finals series wins, then criteria 2 NBA Finals appearances, then the special case 3.1 ABA Finals series wins because I thought that was an important factor that a lot of people don't look at, and then special factor 3.2 ABA Finals appearances, followed by. Well, no, I'll see what you think so far. Do you think this is a valid way of looking at it?
Are you evaluating in terms of which franchises have been best historically?
Yes, and then going basically in reverse order, looking at which ones have been the worst, and then saying I want to support those.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that I think if you're because I guess I heard someone say this. I'm not sure who it was, but they said that in a perfect world like every team would win a championship every 30 years because there's 30 teams in the league.
Yeah.
And that would be like it's interesting that what things like dynasties have done, and I think I think all of it honestly goes back to the very beginning of basketball when you had the Celtics winning everything, and then shortly after the Lakers, because like the reason that like the Lakers and Celtics obviously have so many fans, and they're the two largest fan bases in the league probably aside from I'm not sure where New York ranks, but those teams having won 17 and 18 or 16 and 7, however many championships they won respectively, I don't really think that that does go to show how great their franchises are just because they've always been able to win like across decades. I think if San Antonio had been in the league for a longer period of time, we might be able to see that with them as well. A little bit more because I know a lot of their success has been attributed to Greg Popovich in the past 20 years, but I think if you're looking at it in terms of teams to root for, just based on their misfortune and stuff, yeah, that is a pretty good way to look at it because you've got teams like Phoenix who have been very close in the past but have never gotten there. Then you have teams like Toronto who are still relatively new. They haven't gotten there. So, and then Minnesota also, I don't think they've ever played in NBA Finals. Orlando has played in one finals. They've never won a championship. So it does give you a pretty good sense of, which the underdogs, I guess.
Yeah, and just to give an idea to the listeners of what this practice looks like in action, just going based on if the season ended today, how the playoffs would shake out in my ideal world. You have Raptors Bucks. I'd go for the Raptors. Celtics. Oh wait, this is what I would expect to happen. Yeah, I'd Raptors over the Bucks. Celtics losing to the Heat. Cavs losing to the 76ers. Which is interesting because everyone forgets that the 76ers had great teams in the 70s and the 60s, but yeah, they won a bunch of championships, and then the Pacers over the Wizards, then just the Raptors over the Heat, Pacers over the Cavs, Raptors over the Pacers. And then for the Western Conference, I just had Clippers over the Rockets, Thunder over the Warriors, Timberwolves over Trailblazers, Pelicans over the Spurs. Then it went to Pelicans over the Clippers, Timberwolves over the Thunder, and then Pelicans over the Timberwolves, with the Pelicans winning in the finals. Now, obviously, that isn't what I actually think would happen by any means, but I think it's interesting how the Raptors really stay safe throughout it, because like you could see them in the finals this year.
Yeah, that is interesting because they are one of those teams now all of a sudden who their history sort of seems to be behind them in terms of how bad of a franchise that they were. Because I think really for like, I feel like prior to this new iteration of the Raptors are known for a couple things. The Raptors were known for having Vince Carter in the dunk contest, and they were known for having
Being
Kobe
from
drop
Canada.
80 points on them. Like those are the 2 points those are the two things that made the Raptors. But in recent years, I think they've done a pretty good job of sort of wiping their history and making them because Toronto has only been a team for I think since 2001, since the NBA expansion into Canada. So this is their 17th year in the league, and I feel like who knows, maybe 50 years from now, when you look back, like they might be seen as a winning franchise because of similarly to like let's say just out of the blue they're able to win the champion. Or not, I guess it wouldn't be out of the blue, but let's say that they, even though the deck is stacked against them, if they won the championship this year and then they go on every year and they have a pretty good system and culture in place, and then they bring in new stars as DeRozan and Lowry age, they could be seen as one of the better franchises when looking back.
Yeah, definitely, and I think 90% of the credit has to go to Samaya Ujiri. He's been one of the best GMs in the league for like the past 5 years, aside from R.C. Buford, and I'm really surprised that more teams aren't trying to poach him from the Raptors.
Honestly, I feel like teams don't care about it enough. I feel like there should be a lot more interest in who the general manager of your team is because, like, you see Cleveland, and when Cleveland had David Griffin, they were able to, like, they were on it. Like, if they saw a star they liked, like, there was a pretty good chance that they could get them just because of David Griffin. But
Yeah.
now with Colby Allman, like, they had trouble, like, I mean, the fact that they didn't bring, like, I know that they brought a bunch of role players who put together probably equal the impact of one star, but still, like, on like the craziest thing to me is that Dan Gilbert, I think he's the worst owner in basketball.
Yes.
Well,
Well,
he's
well,
horrible.
no. What's his name? Ranadivac with the
The Nets.
Kings. No, Kings. Probably
Oh
off
yeah,
his
yeah.
doing okay.
Okay, let's remove the Kings and Nets from the equation because the Kings and Nets
The
are
Nets
always.
are the Nets owner is doing a good job now. He did horrible like 5 years ago.
Yeah, when he made that Celtics trade, that was the worst thing ever. But Dan Gilbert, I think he's one of the worst owners in the league, and he was sort of saved from himself, I guess, by having David Griffin. But like it really showed to me because if you look back at like some of the headlines from the off season of 2017, David Griffin said that he was elbow deep into a trade to acquire Jimmy Butler, and to have Jimmy Butler on Cleveland with LeBron,
That would have been unbelievable.
like that would have been.
Like that might have put him above the Warriors.
Yeah, I agree because even though Jimmy Butler on a talent perspective probably isn't the player that Kevin Durant is, Jimmy Butler is a true two-way play. Like he really is. Like he's like not as rich man's Kawhi Leonard. Like he really is. And to have like I guess a tier two Kawhi Leonard with LeBron, and then you keep Kevin Love, like that to me is a team. And um, I don't know what that trade package included to the Bulls, but I doubt that it would have included Kevin Love because it was probably Kyrie Irving like one for one.
Yeah, and even that would have been worth it. I mean, this is a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I think Jimmy Butler is as good as Kyrie Irving at offense, and he's miles ahead of him on defense.
Yeah, offensively, I think it just comes down to Butler's ability to actually play through like Kyrie can play through contact just because he can finish very well, but just in terms of the amount of damage that they can, like Kyrie Irving is a little bit more fragile than Jimmy Butler is. Basically, is what I mean.
Yeah, which we say after Jimmy Butler did whatever he did to his meniscus, but that's an aberration.
Yeah, he tore his meniscus, but that's more Thibodeau than it is Butler.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like he's learned his lesson either. I just saw in that Timberwolves Warriors game like Carl Anthony Towns playing 39 minutes, Taj Gibson 40 minutes. So
Honestly, the world should be happy that Joel Embiid doesn't play for Tom Thibodeau because if that was the case, Joel Embiid's career would already be over.
yes,
But yeah, I think like I'm not sure what it. Yeah, but Dan Gilbert just, I mean, like general managers basically, because Dave Griffin was able to almost do that. Like that really speaks volumes to me about how important, how important having a good general manager is. Because honestly, I really feel like it's only a matter of time because before Masai Ujiri does something to acquire a really good star. Like,
Well, I mean,
some,
if you remember, he got the Kyle Lowry from the Knicks, so like even that was a fantastic trade.
yeah, and I think he's also obviously heavily involved in drafting. Like he got them to get C.J. Miles, and C.J. Miles in trade, and then drafting DeMar DeRozan. But or I'm not sure how long he's been the general manager, but still,
Yeah,
he's
I think it's
drafted.
been like 5 years, but
He's drafted well for his position, basically. Like since he's been there, like he's drafted well. Like in terms of Pascal Siakam, he's done a good job, and like in terms of is it OG Anunoby?
yeah.
Yeah, like things like that. Like he's done a pretty good job, and at some point in time, Toronto, I really feel like they're probably going to acquire a pretty good free agent. And I feel like this would be or not this, maybe not this summer, but in the 2019 offseason, I think they should really like look into it. Because I mean, let's say that DeMarcus Cousins goes to the Pelicans. I mean, not the Pelicans. Let's say DeMarcus Cousins goes to the Raptors. Like that's a team. Like they could be the favorite in the East if they had a player like that. So.
Oh crap, his name is Masai Ujiri. I kept calling him Samaya.
Oh, Samai, yeah, it's Masai.
Whoops. Okay, well, no, that's not great. But yeah, he's been amazing, and it's such a Knicks move to have him originally been a Knicks executive, and then he gets basically thrown out.
The Knicks are the worst. Phil Jackson was a joke.
Yeah, and on your point about worst owners in the league, I think James Dolan is actually worse than Ranadivek. Because at least Ranadivek is doing a great job with like the arena and everything.
Yeah, and I mean, even so, this year, like their culture changed a little bit, getting Zach Randolph and Vince Carter to come play there. However, they pulled that off. But if I was either of those players and I was like winding down and Michael, I don't know why you would want to play for the Kings. So the pitch there might have had to have been like perfect.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe it was just like, hey, you want to live in California?
Truly, because the Clippers, Lakers, and Warriors probably won't have you.
Yeah, but would you rather have like a a great coach in the NBA or like a great GM?
That is a very interesting question. If it came down to it, I would probably have to say a great general manager because I feel like to a degree, even when you have a good coach, um, obviously more of what happens in the game is predicated on the player. And because of that, if you have a general manager who's able to bring in more talent, even if your coach isn't that good, you can probably still win a lot of games just based on having talent. Because I mean, I'm one of them. I'm like some people think that I'm a hater because of this, but I genuinely feel like Steve Kerr, like while he's a good coach, I don't think that he really was the coach of the year because the year
No.
that they won the year they won 73 games, Luke Walton is the one that coached them to 39-4. So it
Yes.
sort of shows me, and like he let them coach themselves even, which sort of shows me like the expendability of a player like him. I think Steve Kerr did a lot in order to change, like you said earlier, like he made it a pass happy offense. But I really feel like other than just saying pass the ball more, be more free shooting, and letting Steph Curry have the ultimate green light, I really don't feel like he expanded off that much of what Mark Jackson did because he himself credited and said Mark Jackson made them a defensive minded team. Like that had nothing to do with me. Um, so I do think coaches are a little bit more expendable than general managers because general managers allow you to have the talent that you have, whereas coaches can, even if they're really good coaches, if you have a lot of talent, it can sort of not really matter.
Yeah, and I think the Raptors are the perfect example of why the general manager is all that matters. Because I think most people would say Dwayne Casey is a below average coach in the NBA. Like I know some people that would personally take someone like Doc Rivers over Dwayne Casey just because he's not adding that much to the team. But
Dwayne Casey is weird because now he's in. I agree with you in the sense that Dwayne Casey isn't that good of a coach because he really should have been able to do a lot. Like this year is an aberration, I think, for him because
yeah,
he's being brought up in coach of the year discussions because he made a smart decision. But in terms of his history, like he's really done the Raptors in just in terms of how he was horrible with lineups in the playoffs. Like when DeRozan and Lowry were off in the play, like he refused to take them. Like he just kept playing them, and it's just like, oh, it'll come around. Like they'll get hot. Like it'll happen. Like I guess to a degree, yeah, you should have faith in your players, but at the same time, like
Yeah, you
you
gotta make
really don't.
you gotta make adjustments.
Like yeah, like you have like he's one of the worst. He's one of the worst coaches in the league in terms of making adjustments. The
Yeah,
one thing about Tyronn Lue that I like is that Tyronn Lue, in the well, he hasn't done it recently, but in the 2016 finals, he did make really good adjustments. Steve Kerr, he's also one of those players. Like Steve Kerr, though, like I don't really feel like he makes adjustments. I just feel like because the Warriors have that whole thing about strength in numbers, like he just kind of plugs and shoves and sees like oh like let's put you and give you some minutes. If it works out well, then okay, there you go. I look like a good coach now.
yeah, and like the biggest thing of Steve Kerr is just he doesn't make mistakes.
Yeah, but like the interesting thing about Steve Kerr is that like when the Warriors decide to turn the ball over and play sloppy, like they lose. Like it's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like they're one of the more like even they get a lot of praise, but and they rightfully so, but they are one of the more turnover prone teams in the NBA. Like you see some games where they'll have like 27 turnovers and then they'll still win because
like 27. That's a
yeah,
lot.
like they'll have a lot. Like they'll have like 24, 25 turnovers and they'll still win because I mean they're the Warriors.
Yeah, but for me, like all that matters is assist to turnovers. Like if your passes are overshadowing how you're doing turnovers, I don't really care if
Yeah,
you're
and
turning it.
that is why they're so successful because even when they have high turnover games, they have more assists always.
Yeah,
So
and that's why they still lead the league in it because they're still a great team.
yeah, I just feel like if you like the one thing to me that really kind of sort of spelled out to me that their coaching wasn't really that important was because Luke Walton, like he straight up coached them to 39-4.
Yeah.
Which is a better record than what Steve Kerr did when Steve Kerr had them like for his stretch of that season.
Yeah, how do you think Luke Walton's been doing as a coach on the Lakers?
Oh yeah, this is interesting because we were just talking about the Nuggets. He got into a screaming match with Jamal Murray on the sideline.
Oh wow.
He started like swearing at him and like saying like "f you" and like that kind of thing. And he said that Jamal Murray is a disrespectful player. He's a very emotional coach. I think it's because he's young and he's not that far removed from being a player, so he still gets into it. I think he's done a pretty good job with what he's had. He I think is really good at making adjustments in game, and he's also like he's not afraid to try new things either. Like he played Brandon Ingram at point guard for a little while, and he flourished. He's very willing to like let Julius Randle go out there and play. He's willing to try new things, and I think he's doing a really good job as a young coach. I feel like he's going to be one of the best coaches in the league in a couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think Terry Stotts is finally going to get the NBA Coach of the Year award that he's been deserving for like 3 years straight now?
If Terry Stotts, I love Terry Stotts as well. I know you and I were very heavy on this in the one year that they were the fourth seed.
Yeah, when Steve Kerr won it.
Yeah, yeah, and I know we were really heavy on that because that was the first year after they got rid of their four starters, and that was the year CJ McCollum won Most Improved Player and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, no, I do not think so. I feel like it probably end up going to Dwayne Casey or Brad Stevens, even though it shouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, I would take Brad Stevens as a coach over Terry Stotts, but I mean, just working with what he has.
No, I mean this season, yes, Brad Stevens would deserve it over Terry Stotts, but I feel like it wouldn't be that long of a shot if Portland is able to maintain the 3 seed, and maybe if they can gain some separation from the teams below them, then yes, I do believe he should be in consideration. But in terms of, I feel like Brad Stevens or Dwayne Casey will probably end up winning it this season, or maybe even Mike D'Antoni.
Yeah, didn't Mike D'Antoni just win it last year?
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of voter fatigue
he won't
with
win
that.
back to back. They don't do that. Coach of the years don't win back to back.
Yeah, I'll look up when the last time that happened was, but yeah.
I think Popovich only has 2.
So. Yeah, I feel like that's the problem with a lot of these awards. It's just you're expected to be as good as you have been.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's weird because like even if you're consistently great, like it's just like they don't people. I feel like the NBA awards don't reward consistency.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit annoying.
Okay, so do you want to get into advanced metrics or what was the other thing? Or this? Oh wait, that was the really difficult question.
Before we do that, actually, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Oh, absolutely. I love getting questions from people. Nobody ever is confident enough to ask a question.
So here's just because we were just on the topic of NBA awards, this is something that's piqued my interest for the past couple of years. Do you think that rather than having a most improved player award only, do you think that it would be better served to have a most improved player award and then have a sophomore of the year award? Because one thing that I've heard of like some players say, like on the TNT broadcast and stuff, is that it's not really right to award most improved player to a second year player because a second year player is supposed to improve. So like, do you think that it would be a little? I think it would be interesting personally, like to have an aspect of having second year player of the year or sophomore of the year award, because then like I think that would be interesting as well, because then when you have situations like Ben Simmons, Blake Griffin, Joel Embiid, and they missed their rookie season, they could, rather than competing for the rookie of the year award, they could compete for the sophomore of the year award. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean. On that point about Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, I think they're fine for the Rookie of the Year. I get the point that like you have to integrate into the league and all, but it's so telling to just be playing against the actual NBA competition. I think that's much more of a factor than just dealing with NBA travel or not being in
Yeah.
college anymore. But yeah, on the point about a Sophomore of the Year award. I don't think that's necessary, to be honest. I think what they need to do is just for the most improved player award, just make it so that you have to either be in your third year or your fourth year at the time that it's happening. Because I agree. Like
Oh yeah,
if you're just
that's the same point. Yeah, and I see what you're saying.
yeah, because like if you're just a crappy rookie and then like you get good as a sophomore, that's not most improved. That's just you got used to the NBA.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was my main point. I guess I guess you wouldn't have to create a new award for it. But like off your point about third year players and fourth year players, like I think last year was probably like last year and the year before for that matter were both pretty genuine. Like to have Giannis win it, I think was right, and to have CJ McCollum win it, that was right. But I mean, oftentimes when people are talking about the discussion, they just always have these second year players who just got a little bit better. So
Yeah, and like if you look at it something like this year, you see the perfect example of what the most improved player award should be going to someone like Victor Oladipo in his fourth year now, where he first 3 years he wasn't that good. He's given his own opportunity on his own team, and he's really stepped up his game.
so you think he should be the most improved player this year?
I can't think of anyone else that deserves it. And just to close that Coach of the Year thing, literally nobody has ever won it 2 years in a row, going back to '62. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. Victor Oladipo, yeah, he's a very good example of what the award should be. That is true.
Yeah, I mean, who's even like in second place right now on a lot of people's ballots?
Let's see. I'm trying to think. I feel like some people have mentioned. I think it was. I think it was a lottery team. I feel like it was a player on. Trying to think of his name.
Yeah. D'Angelo Russell.
Maybe it was D'Angelo Russell. Maybe I feel like it might have been a player on Denver.
Oh.
It might have been Gary Harris, but I'm not sure.
No, I don't. I don't think they would do Gary Harris. I don't know. The point is that Victor Oladipo seems like the runaway pick right now.
Yeah.
Okay. I think. Oh, that is a really bad train. It looked like she killed somebody. Oh my god. Okay. Yeah.
So advanced metrics.
Yeah. Okay. This is gonna be interesting. So, do you want to start with the really difficult question that I promise you is really difficult, or the just general discussion to preamble it?
We can start with the difficult question.
Okay, this is gonna be difficult. So, just some background on this difficult question. So, every time I think about advanced metrics, this question pops up into my head, and I've literally spent cumulative hours trying to wrestle with this, and I've never been able to resolve the question. And I think it's just because there's so many facets to it, and like it really encompasses all of the arguments around what advanced metrics are supposed to be, and just getting over traditional metrics. So basically, what it devolves into, and this is how I summarized it, when evaluating player performance, I hope you're taking notes, for the for the purpose of determining award winners, should we value the results of a player's play or the expected results of a player's play more? So just to give you an example, so let's say we have player A who is identical to player B in every way, a completely unrealistic scenario, but and both are the two finalists for the MVP award, except player A averages 33 points per game, with an expected 30 points per game, let's say, based on the kinds of shots he's taken or like the defenses he's specifically playing against. And player B averaged 30 points per game with an expected 33 points per game. So what do you think?
Well, that is very interesting. Um, I'm immediately thinking just based on the whole player A, player B thing. Um, just based on the numbers you gave me, 33 and 30. I'm thinking of James Harden, Russell Westbrook from last year.
Yeah.
Like a similar situation to that. So in terms of the award in general, like MVP, I feel like the MVP award is named incorrectly anyway. Um, but just based on the whole thing with advanced metrics, I feel like I don't think that you should award. I personally don't believe that it's right to award a player simply because of something that you expected from them, only because expectations can always be thrown around. Because, we were just talking about most improved player award. Like, that award is basically only because, like, sometimes players completely exceed expectations, such as Victor Oladipo. Like, nobody saw this coming with Victor Oladipo. And because of that, he's going to be rewarded for something. But in terms of MVP, like, I feel like it only comes down to what you actually do. Because me personally, like, I was one of the few that or maybe not one of the few, but I genuinely believe that James Harden should have won the MVP over Russell Westbrook.
That was my thought too.
Like of course it's amazing that you averaged a triple double, but at the end of the day, like he shot 42% from the field.
Yeah.
He shot 33 or 34% from three. And, statistically, like 32 points, like he averaged 31.6 points per game, 10.7 rebounds, and 10.4 assists. So obviously it's amazing. But like, I feel like when people just simply watch the games, like people could obviously see that like there were instances where Russell Westbrook would actually like take rebounds from his teammates because he really wanted to get a triple double. And like, there were some games where like he would play like just a little bit. And like, even in games when he like had bad games, like he would really like try and get a couple stats in. Like, like I remember there was a game when he played like I think 16 minutes and he still had like 6 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists, and stuff like that. So like, like I personally believe, only because like when I think of that situation, I think of the James Harden Russell Westbrook thing. I think that it should be based on what is. I don't think it should be based on what's expected. I think it's based on what's done, because like a player himself cannot help what other people expected from him to do before a season starts. Like in your situation, like if player B.
Well, here, let me just stop you right there because I keep hearing this. What I mean by expected isn't literally what I mean is like you finish your game and then we go back through that game and we say, okay, based on what you did in this exact game, how should you have gotten in like the points totals, your rebounds, and your assists? I don't mean like before the season, so I just want to clarify that.
Oh, if you mean game by game, I would still probably say the same thing in terms of like because at the end of the day, because when looking back on things, people only really look at your production, and if you ended up producing more and you did stuff like, because like I understand what you're saying about the advanced metrics and everything, but at the same time, I feel like MVP awards should be a lot more. I feel like one of the because of the award is called Most Valuable Player. I feel like it should, more than anything, I think that it should account to how much you elevate your team's play. And I don't mean that in terms of like you have to get a lot of assists, but just in terms of things like how much better is your team when you're on the court versus off the court? Like how much better is your team's point differential? How much better is your team's defensive rating? How much better is your team's offensive rating? Which is why I personally believe that to have a player like I don't think that Russell Westbrook should have won that year, because at the end of the day, even though he like you can make an argument about whose supporting cast you thought was better between James Harden's and Russell Westbrook's, but at the end of the day, let's face it, both were pretty subpar if you were to take those two players off their team. And with that, James Harden was able to lead that team to being probably the second best offensive team in the league and winning 55 games. And the only thing that really changed about him was that he was playing point guard instead of shooting guard, which I think did more than anything showed his versatility. And, he was last season, he had a game where he had 53 points, 16 rebounds, and 17 assists. And, while Russell Westbrook obviously had mind-blowing numbers as well, it was, to me, James Harden's numbers last year to me felt more genuine, because you could see how much better his team was playing when he was playing, versus Russell Westbrook's team just seemed like they were just waiting for him to like just do like it wasn't really like Russell Westbrook was playing team basketball. It was just he was playing basketball with a team around him, whereas James Harden was being good by making his team a lot better.
Yeah, and like personally, I disagree on the premise that their supporting casts were the same, but that's not really the point. But I think more so than that, at the Russell Westbrook James Harden point, it brings up a not an even more difficult one. It's a slightly easier one, but the argument of what role usage should play in evaluating a player. Because if you look at someone like Russell Westbrook, he was able to average a triple double because he also broke the record for single season usage, and like if you should penalize a player for doing that or if you should raise him up. And most people, they just say, okay, we should look at efficiency and usage in tandem. And obviously, that's why we thought that James Harden was more valuable. But even still, it becomes a very difficult conversation. But yeah, on your point about raising your team up, then I'm curious to see what you would think about another example I had, which was Kawhi Leonard from last year. If you're evaluating him for Defensive Player of the Year award, because if you remember his on off court thing for defense, I believe he was like he made his defense like zero point 0.2 points per game better, or like even worse than that, and like that would be compared to someone like Draymond Green, where it was like 10 points per game better.
Mm-hmm. But see, the thing about that is that like it's a tricky situation, and you were right. This is a tough question because Draymond Green also he benefits from the fact that he plays on a team that is coached so like, and I'm not going to say that Popovich's teams aren't coached as well defensively, but in terms of the athleticism and the ability for the players on the Warriors to move, I feel like because the Warriors defense looks so cohesive, and because Draymond Green was the best defender on the most cohesive defense, it made sense to give him the Defensive Player of the Year award. Because a little like something that I like to do is like I like to put like let's like could this player have done this in this situation? Like oftentimes when I compare LeBron and Kevin Durant, and like the back of my mind tells me, maybe Kevin Durant may be a little bit better. I think like, oh, but Kevin Durant would never be able to win. Like he would never be able to do what LeBron is doing with this team that's really not that good, and like that kind of thing. So I think that if you had put Kawhi Leonard on a defensive team that was just as good as the Warriors, his numbers probably would have been better because I don't think that's debatable that Draymond Green is more of a like he's a really good help defender, but one on one he really can't hold that many people because like he comes from weak side for mostly all of his really good defensive plays rather than locking someone up one on one, which is why I personally think that Kawhi Leonard, I think he should have been the Defensive Player of the Year last year as well. But in terms of just like, and to a degree, you can like if you were to avoid advanced metrics at all. I know a lot of people are big on the eye test, and I feel like to some degree it is pretty important. Like how well like does your team play better, or do they play better?
Sorry, yeah, I'm just gonna stop you right there. Did you see that replay?
Oh yeah, I did at the dive.
Yeah, no, like right before that of like him getting pushed back when like the ball was like literally on the rim.
Yeah, that should have been a goal.
Yeah. All right, sorry about that.
No, but yeah, no problem. And I feel like just like the thing is with James Harden, I feel like you could easily tell last year that when he was on the court with his team was playing so much better. Like the increase in his team's ability to be good when he was on the floor was a lot better than James Harden. I mean, than Russell Westbrook's because like some people can say like I know Victor Oladipo's situation is like weird to think of. Like he's obviously a good player, and it really feels like to me like Russell Westbrook was hindering him from being the sidekick that he could have been last year. And it's just for those reasons I don't think players like in situations like Russell Westbrook should have won the MVP last year because like the thing with Russell Westbrook is that I feel like it's important to evaluate like how good a player is. Like, is this the year that they are actually the most valuable player in the league, or is it just like something where some anomaly happened and like you just feel like you're forced to give it to them? Because like the thing with James Harden, I feel like was that in 2015 he also should have been the MVP over Stephen Curry's first year, and the players even voted for James Harden to win the MVP. He was the Players Association MVP.
Yeah, and I think like we definitely have regrets now because now he's kind of gotten screwed 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Well, not in a row, but
that kind of thing is wrong. Like I feel like it should be more based. I don't think that there should be as much of a bias in terms of like just having crazy stats. I guess like I wish that it was a little bit more like it used to be, where like Steve Nash was able to win 2 despite Kobe Bryant having better statistics. Like I feel like that was fair because Steve Nash was clearly elevating his team. Like he was the reason that those Phoenix Suns teams were so good, whereas Kobe Bryant was losing in the first round with his Lakers team. Like I just feel like having a 6 seed, like I feel like the first and foremost, should be like I think that if your team is not at least if your team does not have home court advantage in the playoffs, then I think that you should be eliminated from MVP discussion personally, because like the best players in the league, even if like that's why Anthony Davis I think is a legitimate discussion this year, is because he might actually end up being home court advantage in the playoffs. But like if your play is not able to elevate your team to being one of the top 8 teams in the league, then I mean, how can you say that you're the most valuable player in the league? So I think first and foremost, the first criteria should be whether or not you have home court advantage in your conference, and then from there, you should figure out who the best players are on each team, and that way you could get 8 candidates, and then among those 8 candidates, you could just look at things like, okay, like who is the best statistically, who is the best, like, and then after you get through the stats, like if one of those player stats is just clearly so much better than the other ones, then obviously you can give it to them. And then if they're kind of close, like you were saying, then you can look at things like, okay, how well did their team play when they were both on the court? How well did their team play off the court? But at the same time, you can also, I think it's also okay for you to factor in how good is their team, because like if you're looking at like, let's say like the player that's on the first team in the West, like let's say, you know, you're looking at James Harden versus the 4th team in the East, this will be like, you know, let's say LeBron was 4th and LeBron was doing that. Like, you know, like let's just change up the situation a little bit. Like I feel like in that situation you should give it to like if okay, like let's say the top 2 candidates are Kevin Durant and LeBron, right? Because Kevin Durant is first in the West and Kevin Durant's stats are similar to LeBron's, and then LeBron is 4th in the East, and but like I feel like in that case it should be LeBron, because LeBron obviously his team would be much worse and he was able to elevate them to being so much better, so therefore he is more valuable, so he should be the most valuable player.
Yeah, it's a good point, and like that's it. That's why players like Russell Westbrook can even get a consideration, being on like such bad teams where like even if they weren't one of the top 4 seeds, they raise their team to a point where they're even close to that. But I think it is a good point that like you should have to be like one of the top 4 seeds in your conference to even be looked at, because even looking like at players like Russell Westbrook, you do the kinds of things he was able to do because you just take away all the possessions from your teammates, and I think that has a lot to do with why you haven't seen a lot of development from anyone else on the Thunder aside from just the free agents that they brought in. But
and I mean, even Steven Adams' development, I think, has been stunted by the fact that Russell Westbrook takes his rebounds.
yeah, good point.
Like it's gotten to the point where like this is, I think, extremely interesting. Steven Adams is averaging 9 rebounds per game, but he's only averaging 3.8 defensive rebounds. Like he's resorted to getting the majority of his rebounds from the offensive side of the ball, because Russell Westbrook is, you know, obviously it's easier for him to get defensive rebounds than it is for him to get offensive rebounds.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just looking back through a list of the MVP awards and the seeds of the teams that they were on. Thank God for Kiwara for this. The last time even a number 3 seed got it was 1999 with Karl Malone. That's obviously with the strikes shortened season.
Yeah,
and then like in 1988 with Michael Jordan. But literally every other year it's been a first seed or a second seed. Obviously Russell Westbrook being the aberration there, but he shouldn't have won it in our books.
Yep, I really don't think he should have. I mean, well, Houston was the 3rd seed last year, so that I guess also would have been a little bit of a weird thing. But still, I mean, I just feel like it should be top 4 seeds in the I feel like advanced metrics I think they can play a factor, simply because of like, but not too much of a factor, because a player who's on a better team will have better advanced metrics. And because they're on a better team.
Are you seeing that stat for the Nets?
Which one?
The most games with 24 plus assists.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. Just to recap what we're seeing right now, apparently the Nets have 13 consecutive games with 24 plus assists, and teams ahead of them there are the 1995 Magic, the 92 Pacers, twice apparently, and then the 90 Cavs with 17 compared to the Nets 13. So that's incredible. Apparently they pass.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of hope that they keep playing poorly though, so that
yeah, no kidding.
Cleveland pick can be pretty high.
Yeah.
But as far as advanced metrics in terms of voting, I just feel like I don't think that too much should be put into them because if you play on a better team, then your advanced metrics are going to be a lot better. Um, I mean, I'm not really sure what value over replacement means, but just in terms of what the stat itself is called, value over replacement, I assume it means like, like what is your value rather like if you were replaced. Like LeBron James, I think is one of the best value over replacement players ever, which I think makes a lot of sense because he's one of the most valuable players. But I don't think in terms of like plus minus and like defensive box plus minus and like offensive rating and like all that sort of stuff. I don't think should be factored into it too much because like you could be a player like LeBron James who's going to have a bad defensive box plus minus because you play on such a bad defensive team, which doesn't really have that much to do with you personally being an individually poor defender. It just has to do with the fact that your team is getting outscored so much when you're on the floor because no one else around you is playing good defense.
Yeah, definitely. And that transitions nicely into the conversation I was going to go to next. So, like, there are three big NBA advanced metrics that people really use, and these are like the all-encompassing ones. And those are win shares, and obviously it's derivatives win shares per 48 minutes, and it's other ones that don't exist, but I'll just pretend they do. Box score plus minus, which does have a lot of derivatives. You got the ones that bettors use, like RAPM or whatever it is. Then there's real plus minus for ESPN, and then I know there is one other one that I'm forgetting. And then you have VORP, obviously, which is a bit of a MLB derivative. It's like trying to be like a win. No, not a win shares thing. What do they call it? A wins above replacement.
Yeah.
So among those three, I guess you kind of addressed it, but like, which one do you really prefer?
I prefer value over replacement because, like I said with plus minus, it's like if you're playing a lot of minutes on a bad team, then your plus minus is going to be horrible because your team is giving up so many points, and that's really not your fault as an individual player. And what was the other one you said? You said box plus minus.
Yeah, and then win shares.
Win shares. Oh, win shares. I feel like are relatively important, but that's another also on the same note. Like, I mean, how is a win share calculated? Do you know?
Yeah, I actually know. I did some research on that. And box score plus minus. Oh crap, is that Embiid? Oh no, he's all right. I thought Embiid got injured.
He's
I had a heart attack for a second.
he's okay.
Okay, yeah. So I unfortunately didn't have time to do my research on VORP, but how win shares is calculated is it's just using like a pretty box score based formula where it amalgamates all of the. Essentially, it's the same as a box score plus minus, aside from the fact that box score plus minus looks at the team's performance more so. But the biggest thing with win shares, and this is something I was actually going to mention when I was talking about why expectations do matter over your true potential, not your true potential, your true performance, is that win shares, how it works, is it assigns the amount of win shares that are even available to every player based on its team's overall performance. So a team like the Warriors, let's say last year where they won 67 games, their players, every player on their team were competing for a pool of 67 wins, while a team like the 2015-2016 76ers, they were all competing for a pool of 9 win shares.
Okay, I see.
So and like my problem with that is that I think you absolutely have to look at Pythagorean expected wins, because like if you don't, then you're going to have teams that were just clutch, something like the last year's Celtics team where they won 48 games, I believe, but they were expected to win 53 based on their point differential. So just right there, you have 5 wins that are gone from the players at pretty much no fault of their own, just a bunch of clutch plays that aren't repeatable.
I think that's backwards. I think the Celtics won 52.
Oh, okay, okay. So then they got 5 extra that they shouldn't have had.
Yeah. But the same point. I know what you mean. Like you could just put another team in for this, But like even the Raptors, I think they had like one of the higher totals of wins by less than 5 points or something like that.
I'll check.
Or even the Timberwolves, I think last year they didn't win that many games, but I think they had a lot of games by only a few points, and they had lost a lot of games by only a few points as well.
I'll check both.
So in situations like that, I think how you look at advanced metrics, I feel like at the same time, like it really like at the end of the day, the discussions are like I hate to say this because this is really unfortunate, just in terms of how many bad teams are in the league. But I really feel like when you're looking at when you're looking at players to evaluate, I genuinely feel like it really should only be players on playoff teams because, like, I mean, at the end of the day, like the goal for every franchise is to win a championship. So if you're not even in the playoffs, I don't really feel like you should be in that many discussions like about anything really because basketball as a whole is about winning the championship. So if you're not even in contention to win the championship, then like, well, what is the point of even talking about you? Like, other than like you're a cool basketball player. Like, I mean, like Devin Booker, for example, like he's a fantastic talent, and I think he's going to be very good when the Phoenix Suns finally grow into what they're supposed to be. But as for right now, like I feel like the most you can say about Devin Booker is that he's a really good scorer and a pretty good player who's going to be good later. But in terms of how you evaluate him right now, I don't really feel like you could put him in conversations about like, oh, like is he better than this player? Is he better than this player? Like, some people try and say stuff like Devin Booker is already better than Klay Thompson, and like,
No.
I mean, like, like in theory, I guess, like when he's a really good player in like 5-6 years, then yeah, you could look back and you could say that he will be better than Klay Thompson. But as of right now, like you can't even really say that about Devin Booker because you don't know anything about what he can do when he has a good team. So I think it's more important to evaluate like the interesting thing that I like. LeBron is one of my favorite examples about this because LeBron is one of the only players I think who he's had the luxury of playing on a really really good team, and not a luxury, but he's had the detriment of playing on a really really bad team. So we've been able to see that LeBron he's like we can easily say that LeBron is great no matter what he's on because he's played with a team that was only winning 18, 19 games without him and elevated them to being a 66 to 61 win team. And then he's also played on a good team like Miami when he's had other stars with him to also like, and he's also won 66 games there. So
I kind of want this flashlight.
Yeah, like he's really like LeBron is he's unique in that aspect, and I think he's one of the only players that we have the luxury of being able to do that with. But I think really, I feel like people should look more at how good someone's team is when they're evaluating how good a player is because like this we brought this up so many times today, but like we were talking about Kevin Durant at the start of the podcast, and like he's elevated by the fact that he has always played on good teams. Like Kevin Durant has not played on a poor team since his rookie year. Like the Thunder were like you say what you want about the Thunder, but at the end of the day, like he made 2 Western Conference Finals, and he was like I think there was only like 1 year where they lost in the first round. Like he was consistently getting to the playoffs. He had a all-star point guard like the whole time. Even Serge Ibaka was, Serge Ibaka I think probably got snubbed out of a Defensive Player of the Year award at some point when he was an amazing defender. Like he was averaging like 2.5 blocks per game. Like, and so I don't really think it's fair to say that players who are on really good teams are better than players who are on really bad teams because you really can't evaluate them on an even playing field.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and sorry about getting distracted with this flashlight. It just seems like it can do absolutely everything. Yeah, so just to close the book on that point about expected point differential versus not just actual record versus Pythagorean record. The Raptors were they were expected to win 52 games. They won 51. And then this is the big one. The Timberwolves, they were expected to win 38 games last year, and they only won 31.
Oh, okay.
So that's massive. But yeah, I pretty much agree with all your points there. It's pretty ridiculous.
I mean, like, just even like when you look at players like, I mean, like Kyrie Irving, like the fact that people were considering Kyrie Irving as an MVP candidate earlier in the season to me was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, how can you say that a player who, without LeBron James, was only winning 19, 20 games? Like, I understand that he was young. This is the tangent that I have altogether, but I'm gonna try.
Well, here I'll let you go on that tangent because I got to go to the bathroom real quick.
All right. So basically, since Kyrie Irving has been in the league, just in my opinion, Kyrie Irving, when I look at his statistics, just year by year, like Kyrie Irving truly, he's an amazing player. Like I'm probably going to get a lot of hate from a lot of Celtics fans out there, but since Kyrie Irving has been in the league, he really, in my opinion, has not improved all that much as a player because like in his rookie season, he was shooting 47% from the field, 40% from three. He was averaging 19 points per game, around 5 assists, and a little bit north of 3.5 rebounds, and 1.1 steals and 0.4 blocks. And now he's in his 7th season, I believe, and he's averaging 25 points per game. But literally every other statistic in terms of how like his percentage from the free throw line, his percentage from the field, his percentage from three, and his assist totals, his steals totals, his rebounding totals, and his blocks totals. Every single thing is the same, and he really just throughout the only thing that's changed about Kyrie Irving in terms of how he is as a player, the only thing that's changed is because he's taking more shots per game, and because he's primarily a player who he operates closest to the basket because he's an elite finisher. Like he scores more layups, and as a result, he averages 4, 5, 6 more points per game. And Kyrie Irving, just to have a player who really hasn't made that much improvement in terms of his ability, like because on the defensive level, like he really has not improved at all. He's always been a very poor defender, and he to have a player like that who hasn't improved at all, just all of a sudden playing on what was the best team in the East for a long time, like to include him in MVP discussions simply because he's playing on a good team, to me is ridiculous when his statistics haven't changed, improved, or really impacted anything. Because even when Kyrie Irving has a really bad game, the Celtics are still able to win, and then when he has a really good game, they're able to win. So Kyrie Irving does not really scream value to me at all, because like to me it's ridiculous that just because a team is really good, people start considering that team's best player as an MVP candidate. So
Yeah, like we could literally do. I feel like we have at this point, like just do a whole podcast on why everyone screws up award voting and like just the 100 different ways that they mess it up. But
exactly,
yeah, like Kyrie's a bad one. And like it's telling that he almost didn't make my All NBA projections.
Kyrie, like I don't know if you would agree. Like I really don't see Kyrie. Like Kyrie Irving has not improved as a player since he's been in the league. Like
No, he hasn't, and like that's really telling on how good he was coming out of college. But like you have to improve.
like there has been no stride in his game whatsoever. Like he's added, and like this is another interesting thing about Kyrie Irving. And I'm not trying to hate on Kyrie Irving because Kyrie Irving is a spectacular player to watch. He's one of the most entertaining players in the entire NBA. But all this, like the main attraction about Kyrie Irving is his ability to dribble and handle the ball so well. But every time Kyrie Irving dribbles more, like I saw a statistic on this, like a little bit around the 2017 NBA Finals. With every dribble that he increases, his field goal percentage goes down. So like his field goal percentage when he took one dribble was like 47, and then his field goal percentage when he took like 7 or 8 was like much lower than that. So
you'd think that'd be the other way around for a ball handler.
It should be, right? But like it sort of goes to show that sometimes he gets so caught up in the whole dribbling thing that like it's like if he doesn't get to the basket with it, then it's sort of not really serving any purpose. And I mean, like I said, I love Kyrie Irving, but like defensively, he really hasn't improved at all. And then just in terms of his shooting, he's always been a really good shooter, and he's always been able to handle the ball really. Like he's added a couple cool little dribble moves to his arsenal, but they really haven't changed his dynamic as a player. Like you'll never, like when you watch a game from Kyrie Irving, like you'll never get something that you didn't expect like you would from other players. Like you can really see, like you can see players like Kevin Durant have really improved since he's been in the league. Like he's developed into a much better passer than he was. He's developed into a better rebounder, a better shot blocker. LeBron has, developed into a much better shooter than he used to be. Stephen Curry has developed his game in terms of how well he can dribble the ball, how well he can finish around the rim. Even Klay Thompson has taken small strides in terms of now like sometimes he'll dunk the ball and drive the ball, and Klay Thompson can even shoot threes off the dribble sometimes. And
well, Klay Thompson is the best spot-up shooter in NBA history.
Yeah, I'm sure, but at the same time, like now, like I feel like if Klay Thompson was able to develop a handle on the basketball, he could be extremely elite because he's 6'7", he's an amazing defender, and like if he was just able to add, like Klay Thompson is one of the most intriguing players in the NBA to me because I feel like if you put him on his own team and put him in a situation where he really had to carry a team and had to learn how to do things like dribble the ball and handle the ball, then it could be really interesting. But basically back to the MVP thing, like. You shouldn't be able, like, you shouldn't consider players who just haven't really done anything spectacular in terms of themselves, and just because they're on a better team, place them on a higher pedestal. That's just ridiculous.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, with the Kyrie thing, I really have never thought of it as he's never improved. But beyond the fact that he's not good defensively, what concerns me is he doesn't care that he's not good defensively.
I mean, yeah, and like I remember Skip Bayless, back to the infamous Skip Bayless.
Oh God!
Like, at the beginning of this season, Skip Bayless was trying to make this argument that Kyrie Irving is now a better defender than LeBron James.
What the hell?
Because Kyrie Irving has a better defensive rating than LeBron, but like
this is what he just didn't acknowledge at all. So the Celtics at the beginning, because they're the best defensive team in basketball this season, I
Yeah.
think #1 or something like that. They had they had 5 players. They had Kyrie Irving, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Marcus Smart, and Al Horford. All of those players were in the top 20 in defensive rating. But that's only because the team is so good defensively. Like, it has nothing to do with them. And Kyrie Irving, I think, was 12th in the league in defensive rating. But that's only because he spent so much time on the court when his team was playing really good defense.
Yeah.
Like, if you watch him play individually, like Kyrie Irving, really, like and again, even like Steph Curry is knocked defensively as well. But Steph Curry is at least like, he utilizes the fact that he has long arms and he can be disruptive and he can get in the passing lane and he can be a smart.
Yeah. Like, he's a good team defender, yes.
Yeah, he's a good team, exactly. And Kyrie Irving just really isn't. Like, he's sort of, like, he is one of those players that, you really have to hide him on defense.
Yeah, definitely. And that gets into a point that I was trying to find an opening for, actually, going back to my really difficult question. One of my follow-up questions I had for that are, how do you control for uncontrollable factors, like for the player, stuff like team system, their teammates, luck, and like how do you account for them, and should you even look at them when you're evaluating for these awards?
I think luck you shouldn't look at because, I mean, it's easy for haters to just say, oh, that was lucky. Like, I remember a lot of people when LeBron hit that one crazy shot against the Wizards and he hit like the turnaround and he fell out of bounds. People were like, oh, that's just luck. Like,
Yeah.
like, okay, but like,
And I suppose that's more of a baseball thing for me, because like in baseball you'll have people talk about like, oh, you had a really good batting average on balls in play, but your average shouldn't have been that good. So I guess that's just not an NBA thing.
I personally, like, you could call a lot of shots lucky just based on what you think. Like, if you don't like Steph Curry, then it's easy for you to say that Steph Curry shot from half court against the Thunder in 2016 was luck. And like, if you hate LeBron James, then it's easy to say that the Kyrie Irving 3 against Steph Curry in the 2016 NBA Finals was luck. And if you're if you love the hell out of LeBron and you hate Kevin Durant and the fact that he went to the Warriors, you can say that the shot in Game 3 in LeBron's face, you can call that luck. Like, so I don't think luck should be factored into it at all. But
yeah, I guess it's too easy of an opening.
Sorry?
It just adds too easy of an opening for people.
Exactly. And also, in terms of team, though, I do really feel like you need to, like, I wish that there was just a simple ranking system, like, in terms of just number, like, based on literally, like, every talent an NBA player can have, you can just give them a number on a scale of, like, 1 to, like, 20, how good an NBA player they are. And, like, you know what I mean? And then, like, based on, like, if you were to just rank players just in terms of their, like, just if you give them a number for their value on a scale of, like, 20 being, like, the best player in the entire league and 1 being the absolute worst player in the entire league. And then you can use, like, you can use decimals. Like, you could say that, like, like, you could say, like, a player, like, I don't know, like, you could say that Anthony Davis is, like, a 18.5 because, you think that while he's an amazing player, you can't give him the extra points because, of his inability to pass the ball and his inability to stroke it really well from the outside. But, things like that. Like, if you were just able to give players, like, a solid number total to how good of a player they are, and then you assign that to every player in the league, and then that way you could be able to evaluate it and be like, okay, like, in total, his team without him is this good. And then that way you can sort of tell how good their team is. And then the players with the smallest total for that, like, that means that those are the players who are playing on the worst teams. And then you would be like, so, like, if you were to do that with the top 4 teams in each conference, like, it's easy to say, like, the Warriors, Rockets, and Cavs, they all have better individual players than, a team like, let's say, the Blazers or the Pelicans. And that way you would really be able to see the value of a player like Anthony Davis and Damian Lillard, DeMar DeRozan, etc.
Yeah, and I honestly, I think they should avoid the decimals, because one of the big, I'm trying to figure out what they're doing with this tessellator, telestrator or whatever, but yeah, I think it's something that everyone always really avoids when they're ranking players. And like, I get that this isn't supposed to rank them, it's just, well, I guess it is, but it's not for the purposes of telling you who's the best. Is that
it's just for the purpose of rating them, basically, like, to evaluate others. Yeah.
And like, one of the biggest things that people always miss on is they never do it on a tier system, where you have, like, okay, this guy is a top tier player, he's like a top 5 player in the league. We're not going to say if he's number 1 or 5. We're just going to say he's a top 5. Then these guys are like the next 8 or so. Then we have like the next 10, and then whatever. They never do that, and I think that's something that people should really think about doing more often. That's not something I do because I think it's a lot more interesting to get into the nitty gritty ones. But
Yep.
if you just talk about like, okay, is Kyle Lowry a better player than I don't know, what's a good one? I don't want to say John Wall because that is close. Uh,
Damian Lillard
yeah,
even.
yeah, Damian Lillard. Well, that's pretty close too. I don't know. Here, how about this? So you have Clint. Who's better? I don't know. Clint Capella or Nikola Jokic? Like that's not particularly close. Clint Capella is mostly just a product of his system, and like you can get people to agree on that. So you put them a tier apart. So
Yeah.
you do rankings where they're not going to be inherently controversial, and you're not going to have people being like, "Oh no, he's not number 7 of all time. He's number 6 of all time." Like,
Exactly. Like me personally, like just going on the tiers, like I do have my personal tiers. Like I think tier one of NBA, like is like I've got players like LeBron, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Steph Curry, Anthony Davis. Like that's tier one, and Kawhi Leonard when he's healthy. And then tier two, I have players like like Russell Westbrook and Damian Lillard, and then you have um, uh, Paul George, for example. I consider him a tier two player. Um, you know, and like and it's not even just based on like a lot of that, in my opinion, is just based on how well that they're able to impact their team. Because I feel like the tier one players are the players who can really turn a team around, and they're the type of players. Kevin Durant is a little controversial, but just based on talent, his like immense talent, I feel like he has to be in tier one. But like James Harden, Steph Curry, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, like they can shoulder teams basically. Like they can be the best players on championship teams. I feel like.
yeah, and anyone that says otherwise for Anthony Davis, just look at the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And like the thing with Anthony Davis is I feel like Anthony Davis is the only big man in the NBA who could be the best player on a championship team. Like that's really how I categorize the top tier one players in the like. Are you capable of being the best player on an NBA championship team? And Kevin Durant did that last year, but it's just it's weird because Steph Curry is so good that and he's so important to the team that it's like you can say that Kevin Durant's the best individual player, but he's not really the most valuable player on the team.
Yeah.
So that there's controversy there with the Warriors, but like in terms of everyone else, like yeah, I agree. Like people should rank people more in tiers than they do like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But just in terms of what I was talking about, like assigning players just a value to like how good they are as a player, like just add up their total skills and like you give them a number and then like you're able to tell team totals is like okay like based just in terms of how talented a team is like this is what they are. And this goes back to your whole thing about expectancy. Like you'll expect a player who's on a really good team to have a pretty good year because I mean like they should win a lot of games. They should have a good performance. But that way it makes awarding easier because then you're able to tell who was actually more valuable, like who did more with less.
Yeah. And like it's so important to look at that because today and we have computers that can crunch all these numbers. You can say, okay, this guy played I don't know like 4,000 minutes in a season. We can look at every single minute that they played in a season and divvy it up based on the strength of the team on the court and the strength of the players that he was facing it off against. We can do that because we have computers and we need to even today like with the incredible metrics that we're able to do, and like all of the regression-based ones, we I still feel like we're not fully leveraging the power of the technology that we have, and like a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to do proof by exhaustion. That's weak. We should be proving absolutely. If you have a tool that can do this stuff by exhaustion, and like what I'm talking about is a debate going on in mathematics where it's like, oh, should you test every single test case, or should you have to do the old-fashioned way where you do general terms? If you can do proof by exhaustion, you always should, because all we're trying to do is get the correct result. We're not trying to be, oh, but that's not the beautiful way to do it. I don't care if it's the beautiful way. We want the answer.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, like the MVP voting, I think to a degree is always going to be subjective. Like there are always going to be so many. Like to me, the most ridiculous thing in NBA, one of the most ridiculous things in NBA history was that in 2013, one voter voted for Carmelo Anthony to be MVP.
Yeah.
That's why LeBron James did not win unanimously in 2013 because one player thought that Carmelo Anthony on like the 5 seed Knicks, averaging 28 points per game and like 3 assists and 6 rebounds, should be MVP, as opposed to LeBron, who averaged 27, 8, and 7 on 57% shooting, 41% from three. Like that was just like that's ridiculous. Like I think people just need to be like I really feel like voting for the MVP award should be off of unbiased, subjective people who don't have connections with all these players. Because like players like Chris Broussard, for example, isn't like I've mentioned him a couple times today. Like he has a vote on the for MVP, and he he's on like all these shows talking about like, oh, like LeBron is the best player in the world, like Durant's close, like he has too many, like he talks to some players individually, like it's not just unbiased watchers, like it's people that actually know the players. And I just feel like that's a little bit unfair because then it's unbiased. Like, I mean, I just wish that voting was just completely objective and not like people having opinions about like, oh, like this player should be this because he's done this and stuff, like and I also feel like there shouldn't be such a thing as like makeup awards, like like some like I don't want James Harden, like let's say James Harden somehow lost the MVP, like let's say he got injured tonight and then he didn't play any games the rest of the season, and then the rest of the season Anthony Davis averaged like 50 points per game and Anthony Davis ended up winning MVP this season. Like, I wouldn't want the voters to feel like they have to include James Harden in the voting next year just because he wasn't able to win it this year. Like, it shouldn't be like that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to conclude that point on like why we need to make advanced metrics better and why it's so important to talk about them right now, is that even like the very best advanced metrics that actual sports bettors are using, stuff like our APM, which is the main one that they use. If you know anything about regression coefficients, basically these advanced metrics are trying to predict future performance, and you can just run a regression test where you're in AP Stat. You probably know what that is, or if you don't, you'll find out in a month. Where like
Yep.
you're just trying to see how the future performance is going to relate to the expected one. And literally, you can just like divide them and say, okay, here's our coefficient. If it's closer to one, then you have a better regression coefficient. The best that we have right now is about, and this is compared to the ideal of 1, is a 0.65 for the entire league.
Wow.
That's not even 2/3. And so, like, we still have a lot of work to do. And on your point about, crap, what was your point? I lost it. What was your point again?
About what exactly?
Just what you were saying before.
About ranking players and giving them a number?
No, after that, like what you just finished saying.
Oh, about like if James Harden were to, oh, like I don't want any objectivity in voting.
Oh yeah. Thank you. Okay, so that sounds like the argument, and like this is an argument I agree with. For like the ideal leader of a country in politics is the philosopher king, but
Mhm.
we can never get the philosopher king because that's not an ideal world. And but I am curious to see for voting. Do you think it would be better off if we just did like an American Idol system where the entire country or the entire world can vote on who deserves the MVP? Do you think that would be better?
The entire world, I think, would be a little ridiculous because then you'd have like the entire country of Georgia voting for Zaza Pachulia.
Yeah.
But I think, like, I feel like maybe it could be a little bit similar to like maybe you could do, because one of the NBA awards that I feel like is extremely objective is the all rookie teams, because every year on the all rookie teams you literally you only just see the players who deserve to be there. Like, you don't see it's never a case like for the all NBA teams, like there's always like one, it's like, oh my god, like why is he there, like why was Klay Thompson on the all NBA third team in 2016 and James Harden didn't make one at all, like that was ridiculous. And I think the reason that the all rookie teams are so objective, and it's just so like these are the best rookies, these are the best all rookie teams. Like you have unknown players on the all rookie teams, but no one cares because like like it's the all rookie team, and those are decided by the coaches, and the coaches vote for who they think the best rookies are,
Oh,
and
good
then they're
point.
not allowed to vote for their own players. Like, that's so simple and it's so proper. Like, the coaches in the NBA know so much because they see these players, they coach against these players, they have to game plan against these players, they know what they have to worry about, they know what they can't worry about. Like, I feel like they should give more of an impact to like I feel like it should be a combination of like legitimate like basketball analysts, not like media members, because the media is so biased sometimes. I
Yeah.
feel like it should just be like a combination of like actual NBA analysts, like the people who do it for a living, like the analytics guys, and like the rules should just state that like you're not allowed to vote for anyone from your own team, and then you're able to just get something completely objective, because like there's no reason a coach would have a bias for a player if they can't vote for their own player. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic point. I forget what I want to say the NFL does a similar thing for one of its top tier voting systems. No, actually, I'm thinking of the MLB, what they do for they're doing the benches for their all-star teams, and those always turn out great. But would you want to expand that to GMs also get the vote?
Yeah, as long as I feel like it should just be people who are completely object. Yeah, like the GMs even is fine as long as they're not allowed to vote for their own player because then Daryl Morey would cast as many votes as possible for James Harden. But like like if you just keep it completely objective, then I feel like that's how we would get the best results. Because to have media members and like all this stuff involved, like the All Star game is fine to have a little bit of subjectivity because everyone wants to see their favorite players in a game that's an exhibition. But to like it's not really fair to these players to have so many opinionated views for voting because like when you look back on James Harden's career, like you could legitimately say like James Harden could be he's going to be a one-time MVP, but when you look back on his career, he could have been a three-time MVP, and it's just not fair from a legacy standpoint to him.
Yeah, definitely, and that's the argument for why you should look at players based on voting shares and like their performance in the polls overall. Like if you get a second place or something, then you get 2 points versus like a first place, you get 3 point or
Yep.
whatever. But yeah, I think that'd be a much better system than what we have right now, and I, frankly I don't know why we don't do it. To be honest, like it's not like the media members need that role.
Exactly, and like also like another point, just going off the same thing, like from the legacy standpoint thing that I'm saying, like a lot of people in the debate against like I've heard a lot that Michael Jordan and LeBron James, for example, like Michael Jordan has a Defensive Player of the Year award, but there was no social media then factoring into any of the decisions, and then LeBron James ended up finishing second in Defensive Player of the Year voting twice, and he like I personally feel like it was just a lot of media fatigue, not wanting to give him the award over and over again,
Yeah,
and that's also not fair. Like like just because you're tired of voting for the guy doesn't mean that you can't give it to him. Like that's just dumb. Like if he earned it, then he earned it. And LeBron James definitely should have been the Defensive Player of the Year in 2013, but because of things like voter fatigue and just the all-around distaste for the Miami Heat at the time, like people ended up giving it to Marc Gasol when he clearly did not deserve it. And like that sort of thing is just unfair. Like I genuinely feel like if it came down to just coaches having to like worry about LeBron James as a defender, then like LeBron James probably would have had one or maybe even two Defensive Player of the Year awards. And it really just doesn't do anyone any favors to have the system that we have now. I feel like it's the only way that it is. Like there's a panel of voters, and because we've had a panel of voters for so long, we just keep doing that. But similarly to like all the other things in the NBA, like we're playoff seeding might be changing, and the All Star game has changed, and the whole thing about NBA like being okay with some gambling, and I feel like it's just one of those things that should be addressed by the commissioner.
yeah, and on the point about voting shares, I think that, or not voting shares, just award shares. I think that actually solves the problem of voter fatigue because if a bunch of players are getting like second every year, then you can say, okay, LeBron James can still get the award this year, but this guy's going to get second place, and that still means something. While right now it means absolutely nothing if you get second place versus 400th place.
Yep, exactly. Like no one remembers who got second. Like people just talk about like, oh, like okay, you didn't win. Sorry.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Do you have anything else on this topic?
No, I'm good.
Okay, so I'm curious to see what you thought about this. I tried to talk about it with Bijan, but he doesn't really follow any American sports. So something that I think could actually solve the tanking problem. We haven't really talked about this. We just talked about how to fix draft reform. Is like in European sports how a lot of them do a relegation system where like the bottom three or bottom four teams in the league they get moved down to like the league just below it. Do you think that I'm sorry?
I said, oh wow, like
Yeah.
that's wow.
Do you think the NBA could benefit from a system where they had, I don't know, maybe they just brought in like two expansion teams or something, and then just divided the league in half and said, okay, or not? Yeah, I guess just divided the league in half. You don't really have a choice, and said, okay, in 5 years we're gonna divide the league in half. Whoever has the worst winning percentage over these next 5 years, you're gone, and not gone like you're in a lower tier, and then the top 3 teams every year in that lower tier, they get moved back up to the NBA, and the bottom 3 teams in the NBA get moved down to the tier right below. Do you think that'd be a better system?
I think it might come across as a little extreme, but at the same time, I feel like it would work because the NBA is so different from like the other sports leagues, and like with the NFL, like a team that's completely awful can come around next year and be in the playoffs and get
Yes.
close to the Super Bowl. But like the NBA is more of a thing where it takes progression and it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of years. But I feel like you would have to be very careful about the division. Like I really feel like it would have to be like top half and lower half because you could end up with in a situation like in 2015 with Oklahoma City where they just missed out on the playoffs because of some injuries, and then like I don't think a team like that should have to be relegated only because they had some injuries. But
yeah, but no, you would just tell that team that they're going to be back up the next year.
Yeah, like I mean, but then at the same time, like it could cause friction, but at the same time, I don't really see a problem with that system. Like I just feel like there definitely should be some punishment for tank. Like I just don't think that it's like you can't just you can't just waste people's time for a whole year of just not trying. Like that's just so. I mean, honestly, at this point, I feel like things that to combat tanking should sort of be reprimanded. So
yeah, and like the other thing with it is it not only does it combat tanking, it makes the games between the worst teams incredibly interesting. Because like if you're watching something like the EPL, you'll be watching like games between say I don't know what are 2 really bad teams, maybe like Swansea and then like a Crystal Palace, like free of like the 2 of the worst teams in the league. That's an incredibly interesting game because those teams might get relegated down into the league championship, and then they might lose out on millions of dollars the next year because of their team's mistakes, and they have to play their hearts out. And like even those games can be more exciting than like a top 5 game because those teams are actually playing for their lives at that point.
Yeah, but the only thing with it was like it could be just a little bit sad, I guess, because like to a degree, like some teams who just don't have any talent might just not ever get out of it. But at the same time, like
it always goes in cycles. You're not going to be down there forever.
Yeah, like it would be interesting to see how they would have to draft as a result of that. Like would you do it in the sense of like every team still gets 1 draft pick?
Yeah, I would just keep. Well, first of all, I would just change the draft system to what we proposed last week. But if you're going to keep it the same, then, yeah, that's a good point. If you want to keep the draft the same, I say throw out the draft as it is right now because we already went over why that's a problem, and it would only become more of a problem with this relegation thing.
Do you think that this is a thought that I had actually? What do you think about the idea of not being able to trade future draft picks? Future first-round draft picks.
I think that's a terrible suggestion coming from coming from a baseball fan. I absolutely hate baseball for that because in baseball you can't trade draft picks. Let them trade their draft picks.
I saw that idea. I saw that idea somewhere else. Like I agree with you. I would not want it at all. I was reading an article the other day about how if you limited teams from being able to trade their first-round draft picks, then it would and you just did it in terms of worst team to best team. Like I just feel like just in terms of the excitement of the league, like the Jimmy Butler thing never would have been able to happen, and like he would have been stuck in Chicago, and like the Celtics wouldn't even be the Celtics.
No, and like if you want to be an idiot like Propoyov and trade away 5 years worth of draft picks, you should be allowed to be an idiot. Like we shouldn't
exactly. Like you shouldn't do favors for people like in terms of like. So I agree. Like, I disagreed with the article as a whole, but the argument that it was making was basically like if you only allowed it, like you would get more of a like an actually like a cyclic NBA, like in terms of like the best teams would at some point fade out because they would get like their stars would get old and their draft picks wouldn't be as good, and the teams that are bad would get better because they're bringing in more talent, and there wouldn't be the whole like Celtics situations where they're sort of allowed to do both.
Well, coming from the baseball system, that's not remotely true at all. But
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it was. I disagreed with it as well.
Yeah, but and like again with that, most of the good teams in the NBA like that are historically good, it's because they have historically good owners, and you should be credited for that. If you're a good owner, that's to your credit. And like these historically bad teams, like the Suns or the Kings or the who else? Trying to think of another, or the Knicks. It's because you have a bad owner, and like if you're doing a bad job, you deserve to have bad performance. We shouldn't be trying to protect you from yourself. And Yeah, that's how I feel about that. But I'm curious to see how what you think about this because we always talk about how the NBA should be fixed. Do you think that the current playoff system should be as it is? Like, do you think that 16 out of 30 teams should be making the playoffs every year?
I genuinely feel like I don't think there needs to be 1 through 8. Um, I feel like you would get better, more competitive series if you just cut out 7 and 8 and you made it a rather than a like if you made it a 12 team, 6 teams in each conference. Because like I understand that there have been very very few like situations where like the thing about the NBA is that the NBA is not an unpredictable thing. Like the NBA, it's like you see the best teams and then one of the best teams is going to win the championship. Like you're not going to have outliers because we have NBA series where you have to win 4 out of 7 games rather than like something like I feel like it would just be better if you cut out once like the bottom 2 teams because then like rather than having 4 series you could have 3 and then you could space them out a little bit more as well and then you would give more rest in the playoffs, more time in the playoffs, and with that you would get better series in the playoffs because I feel like a matchup of 1 and 6 is going to be much more competitive than a matchup of 1 and 8 because if you look at a year like this year, like okay, like 1 through 8, okay, the Warriors would probably, or the Rockets would probably completely trounce on the Clippers. But if the Rockets had to face Oklahoma City in the first round, that could actually be really interesting because, Oklahoma City, Harden having to come back there, Harden getting, starting his MVP run in the playoffs, or like closing out his MVP run and then starting the playoffs in his old team, like that could make for a really good story. Like I really just don't see the point of having a 7 and 8 seed and having eight teams in each conference, especially when like the 7 and 8 seed in the Eastern Conference wouldn't even be like they would like depending on I'm not sure what the disparity is right now between East and West, but like in certain years like the bottom 2 teams in one conference wouldn't even be close. But first and foremost, I think there should only be 12. But the reason that I think that we should stay in the East versus West in terms of I don't think that we should go 1 through 16 or 1 through 12 as I'm suggesting, but
Okay.
I think that it should be East versus West simply because of this. Like if because one thing like this is a recent thing as well, I feel like, because it's not like the East has always been horrible. Like the East was pretty good in like the early 2000s when you had the Pistons, and then the Pacers were pretty good for a while, and then obviously like the Cavaliers came along when LeBron came, and then in the 90s like you know you had the bad boy Pistons and the Pacers then as well. Like the whole thing about the East and West is sort of just a temporary thing, and I don't really feel like there should be some big overreaction to it in terms of like, oh, like the NBA has been around for what 70 years or something like that, and
Yeah.
like this has only really been a thing for the past maybe 5 6 years. So I don't really see the need to overreact to it, and also like this is one of the main arguments I've heard against it, which I sort of agree with, is that like if you're playing a series and it's like if it's like let's say like you know uh, let's say Portland to Miami, right? Like if that ends up being a series, then like the travel for that would be absolutely ridiculous. Like the
Yeah.
flights would be so long and just like, and then also another thing in terms of ratings, there are many more East Coast, there are many more television sets on the East Coast as opposed to the West Coast. So most NBA ratings and NBA viewership comes from the Eastern Conference. So if you don't have an Eastern Conference and then like your top 9 10 teams are only from the Western Conference, then you're going to have much lower viewership, and the NBA is not going to be making nearly as much money. So for those reasons, basically, the travel, revenue for the league itself, and also like just from like a diehard, like a lover of the NBA, like I love watching basketball. I just feel like it's a cooler dynamic because you have so much history behind the East and the West thing. Like you have the Celtics Lakers rivalry, you have the memorable moments like the Supersonics and Jordan's Bulls and things like that. Like I just feel like it's like if you have like a you know if you have like an all California uh, NBA Finals or an all Texas NBA Finals, like it's just going to be so like not as many people from the outside are gonna watch it. You know what I mean? Because like it's like oh like some like because I know some really diehard fans of their teams like they just stop watching once their team gets eliminated. So like it's like if you have a lot of people like that and then you have an all Texas NBA Finals, it's just the state of Texas watching the NBA Finals and not that many viewers from elsewhere.
Yeah.
I just feel like it draws a lot more viewership to the league to have it in 2 conferences, and it also just I just don't think there's a need to overreact because once the players right now like fade a little bit, like the East is already coming back to being really good. You have Kyrie Irving, who's a good young player in the East. You have Giannis. You have Ben Simmons. You have Joel Embiid. You have Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin. That's they're still good players who are on the same team in the Eastern Conference. Like, and then in the West you have like Jokic. It's not like so maybe like right now the talent disparity is really big, but in a couple years I don't think it really will be. So for those reasons, I really don't think that it's too big of a deal. I don't think it's too big of a deal, the difference right now.
I thought that was Dr. E for a second in this commercial.
Oh,
but yeah, no, I think that's an amazing point on why we shouldn't go to an East and West, dissolve the East and West system, and nobody ever talks about the points you just made. Some people talk about the travel thing, and personally, my solution to that is going to come up later, but it's a great point that rivalries are so important, and I've never thought of the fact that the Eastern Conference has so many more viewers, despite the fact that the West has a lot more talent right now.
It's because like small markets, like teams like
No,
Denver,
absolutely.
Sacramento, like all those teams don't really get any viewership. But in the East, you have Boston, you've got New York, you have Cleveland, you have Detroit, Chicago, like you have basketball in Miami, like you have more of the basketball centric cities are in the Eastern Conference, so you get more viewership from them.
100%. I've just never thought of it and never noticed it. But
yeah.
But with your 1-6 system, so show me what does the first round look like?
The first round it would be Houston and I think it would be Houston, San Antonio actually. Houston, San Antonio. It would be Golden State and.
Well, the Spurs are the 7th seed. So do you mean the Rockets and the Thunder?
Right, Rockets, Thunder, and then it would be Warriors, Wolves, and then it would be
Trailblazers, Pelicans.
Yeah, Trailblazers, Pelicans.
So like then
right,
sorry.
Basically, like having it 1 through 8 just sort of seems like it doesn't really seem like there's any reason for it because like the 7th and 8th, like the 6th seed is the lowest seed that's ever won a championship. So like and like it's so rare for an 8th seed to dethrone a 1 seed like that. I don't think that's happened once since 2011, which was when Derrick Rose got injured.
Which doesn't really count because of that.
Yeah, or it was the 2012 playoffs, and then before that it was 5 years prior. Like it's such a sporadic thing that like, and those teams never go on to actually get anywhere. Like an 8th seed has made the NBA Finals one time and they lost,
and that was in a strike shortened season.
Yeah, that was the Miracle Knicks thing with Jeff Van Gundy and all that. But like, so like for those reasons, I feel like if it's just 6 teams and you have 3 series instead of 8, like you can get more coverage of 3 series instead of 4 series, and you're able to sort of like. Because you don't have as many teams, I just feel like it gives more space, and then you don't have to game plan for as much. And I feel like we would get better thought out series because, like, oftentimes like for NBA coaches and like NBA coaching staffs, like you have to game plan for a series ahead as well because, like, you have to keep in mind who you're going to play in the next round of a series as well as the team that's in front of you. But like if you only have 3 series, you have less teams to game plan for. You have to like you're basically just able to like. I feel like worry about less and just focus more on like, okay, there's 6 rather than 8 because, and just overall, like you don't even ever really get any competition from a 7 and 8. So it doesn't seem like there's a point.
Well, here's my thing. I think this is a lot of other people's hold-ups as well. What happens in the next round? Wouldn't one of the teams have to have a bye?
Let's see. You could go, so it would go 1-6, 2-5, and then 3-4.
Yeah.
Right. So then you would have.
So let's just pretend like the Rockets, Warriors,
and then you could have a bye. I feel like that would be sort of something to work around. No, honestly, I would be okay with it because I feel like if you were able to get a second round bye, then you would like it would put so much more incentive into teams trying during the regular season.
Okay, I can see your point there, but here let me give my system because I think it'll be interesting to see our debate between that. So here's my system, and I've mentioned this before to you, but you probably don't remember it. So my system is every team that has a winning record, you make the playoffs.
Okay.
I don't care about conference. I just.
What if you're 41-41?
Nope. Gotta be a winning. Gotta be a winning record. If you're 41-41, yeah, 41-41 is no better than 0-0. So, That's my argument for that. So let's say there's 10 teams that have a really good record. 10 teams are in. You got 6 teams that are in. You got 5 teams like it was in the Eastern Conference a couple years ago. 5 teams in the playoffs. So that's my system. I'm keeping the Eastern Conference versus Western Conference, but I also have an interesting caveat to that. To solve the travel problem, I have a system where, and I mentioned this as a teaser at the very beginning of the podcast. You calculate how many home teams the better seed should get based on how many more wins they have. Now, I haven't actually given thought to how many more wins it should be. Maybe if you have like I'm trying to figure that out in my head right now. Maybe if you have like 6 more wins, you should get an extra home game. So that means that like let's just pretend this was applied to the 1 through 8 system right now. If you had like a 4v5 matchup, I don't think you should be given credit for travel. Like you're a 4v5 seed. We're not trying to protect you. Like you could have been better. You could have avoided this problem. But someone like the Raptors Bucks or like the Rockets Clippers, which I think is what most people were talking about, like having to travel across the country when you didn't really need to, you were already going to sweep the team. Maybe you could have all 4 of your games at home, and then you wouldn't have to worry about that problem.
Yeah, you basically you're saying you would travel for less games.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be interesting. I just think like the one thing about the NBA to me is like when you have the one thing like when you have a player like LeBron and like he saves up all his energy for the postseason, you sort of see that he coasts throughout the regular season, and I just feel like that ends up being meaningless. So
Yeah,
I
so
feel
like
like
you need
there should be
factors.
more of, and like sometimes teams like Golden State get so good that it doesn't even matter if they're the 1 seed. Like they don't care whether or not they have to start a series on the road or or at home. So like I just feel like it puts a lot more incentive if you get an entire week to rest because that makes you so much, like that makes you a lot more prepared, I guess. Like, and if you earned that during the regular season, and like I feel like that's an advantage that you earned. Like, if you played hard enough to get the number 1 seed, then you should get more time off.
Definitely, and this is where I was going to get into how the buys work. So, like, obviously, with my system, you could have anywhere from, I think the most teams with a winning record in one conference ever was like, I want to say 10 teams. Wasn't there like a thing a couple years ago where the Thunder had like a winning record,
Yeah,
and then like
and like
one,
even LeBron James won 45 games 1 year, and they didn't make the playoffs.
yeah, like I think there was
He's very
one,
very good.
yeah, but I don't think it's ever been more than 10. But what I'm saying for the NBA is they just have a system for each one of these. If you have 5 teams, there's a system for that 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And here's how I would recommend that they do it. So for the 10, I'd recommend that they give the number 1 and 2 seed a bye for the first round. So if you're good enough, you get your bye. And then you just do 1 through 8 from there, and then that gives you 5 teams. And then I'm trying to figure out off the top of my head how this. Do you think you should do that, or should we have it be a 7v10 and then an 8v9 to determine which 2 teams make the playoffs from there?
Probably an 8v9 because it would just be closer.
Okay, so let's say they do like pre-playoffs thing right there, and then you do a 1 through 8 from there. Same thing for 1 through 9. You just have the what would that be? That'd be the 8 and 9 seed to face off to figure out who makes the playoffs. And then so like those teams that make the playoffs and were better, they get their bye as well. 1 through 8 stays the same. 1 through 7, you trying to figure that one out. You give the number 1 seed a bye, and then you just do 2v7, 3v6, 4v5, and then you just go for 1 through 4 from there.
Yeah, I just feel like there should be more value placed on the regular season because like it just seems like at this point like whenever a team gets good they just get complacent and then it just makes the regular season less fun to watch and like 82 games is a huge like a lot of people love to follow the NBA so I just feel like it'd be better if the games as a whole were good and even if the NBA something like if they thought that giving a bye to the best team was too much of an advantage and like too much rest would be
Which
like
I don't
too
think
much
it is.
of an advantage but like even if they disagreed with it, that you could just do the top 4 teams in each conference and then just have, like 1 plays 4 and then 2 plays 3 in each conference. And then like, that's that. And then you just go with 4. And then like, rather than having a first round and then a semi and then a conference finals, it would just be semis, conference finals, finals. And then, that would also just, rather than having to play 4 series in a playoffs, you would only play 3 and then you can just
like you're able to get more rest and you can put more spacing between it, and I feel like it would just make for better series as well because like it would make first round match. It would make the semi conference would be, well, the new first round would be semis, and that would make it more competitive as well because if you're a 2 seed and you're game planning for a 7 seed, like that's much easier to do than to game plan immediately for a 3rd seed. Like, you know what I mean? Like imagine if San Antonio had to come out the gate playing Houston last year as opposed to playing Memphis first. Like, you don't really get like as much of a warm up, and you don't really get like to, you don't really. I feel like it's more. It would just be more competitive, which I feel like the NBA needs.
Yeah, and like I think that's the biggest thing with both of our systems. It's just we want to prioritize the playoffs more, and we want you to feel like you have to win as many games as you. Sorry, not prioritize the playoffs, prioritize the regular season more, and we want you to feel like you have to win as many games in the regular season as you possibly can, because it will make a difference in the playoffs. You can't just be the 7 seed, or you're gonna have to travel more, or you won't get
Like,
that first
yeah,
round bye.
you can't just do what you want because like the way that I feel about it is like I hate it when like you'll watch a game that's like winnable for a team, but then like they'll mess up a few plays and it'll just be like, it's fine, like we can lose this game, it's not a big deal. Like I hate watching that. And the Cavaliers do that a lot, and like it's like they'll be in a close game in the fourth quarter and they'll give up one run, and then rather than keep trying to get in it, they'll just give it up and they'll take the loss. And like I just feel like having a more rigid playoff system would just, it would allow for that to go away because like a team like Golden State, like to them it doesn't matter, right? Like if they to them it makes no difference if they're the 1 seed or the 2 seed or even the 3 seed, or I honestly even the 4 seed, because they could beat any team below them. Like if even if Golden State is the 4 seed and they end up playing the 5 seed, they probably they're so good that they have just as much confidence that they can beat the 5 seed as they do the 8 seed. Like to them, it doesn't matter who they play, and like like it feels like to this point like you're seeding. The purpose of seeding is to reward you, like you get an easier matchup.
Yes.
But if a team is so good, it's not even really like an advantage because both teams are just so much worse that it really wouldn't make a difference.
Yeah, definitely. And
especially with the West being so tight, it's like every team that's not a top 2 seed in the Western Conference, 3 through 10, are all basically the same. So
yeah, I mean it's just ridiculous that people are so insistent on sticking with the status quo, especially in the NBA where you're always seeing changes. You see them get rid of the hack-a-shack rule, or they get rid of like there's just constant change, but then like they're not willing to change specific things for some reason, and that just doesn't make sense to me.
yeah, I agree. I feel like just something that prioritizes and incentivizes the regular season, I think, is the most important thing because like it's so long too that like 82 games, you have to make it worth something so that people actually are in it for 82 games.
Yeah, definitely.
Like it'll be more interesting to follow. Like, and just even like I don't know. This is just something completely unrelated, but maybe like you could even do like just for the regular season, like you could make wins against better teams count for more, like in terms of games back, like it could give you more of a cushion just so it incentivizes you to play harder for the good teams. You know what I mean?
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Like like let's say like like the top, like if you beat a team that's first in the conference, you get like rather than just getting half a game to your like games back, and you get a game, like you get a full. I mean that would probably, that could be controversial because then people would they would just go weaker against weak teams and then just go harder against the better teams. But still,
what if
like
what if you just changed the tiebreaker system so that strength of victory was the number one tiebreaker instead of head to head?
Yeah, head to head, the tiebreaker system is so strange, and I'm glad they like. I think what was it before? It was like if you won your division, you were automatically.
Yes, yeah, like the Trailblazers thing where they were the number 4 seed,
Yeah.
despite being worse than the 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, I remember that. That was the year that the Spurs fell to 6th, even
Yes.
though they were 3rd.
And they really paid for it too because they had to face the Clippers in the first round.
Yeah, and then they lost, and then they didn't get their chance to repeat.
Yeah.
That would have been interesting. Like that honestly, that might have ruined the 2015 playoffs. But I don't know. The NBA, the playoffs in general, I think just need something a little bit different because it's been this way for such a long time that I feel like it's gotten sort of like
stale. Like I wouldn't say boring, but I would definitely say it's stale because it's like it's just like some people don't even watch the regular season at all, and they end up just watching the playoffs. Like I think you yourself
That's
said,
me.
yeah, you don't even watch the regular season because like what's the point? Like
Yeah.
you end up getting 1 through 8, and it is what it is. But like if there was more incentive to either get a higher seed, it would make the games in the regular season much more competitive. Because I mean, I'm someone who like I watch an NBA game almost every single night, and like it's just I just it comes down to I just take guesses onto which one is the most competitive, and then like halfway through the game, I'll look at the score and it'll be like, oh, I'm going to switch the channel to this one because this one's more competitive. But it would really make it so that almost every team is competitive if you had a different playoff system. So
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, I'm like tempted to just follow my system this year and see how it would turn out. But we'll have to see if that comes up in follow up. But just to give the listeners an idea of what the actual tiebreakers are in the NBA, so they go to head-to-head first, then better division record if it's between two teams within the division, then better conference record. Then, oh wow, this was a crappy website. They only had the first three. Here, let me hunt down that.
Usually it only goes to the first three though. Like I feel like if it's past
okay, so here's the rest of them. Head-to-head. Oh wait, I already said that. One loss percentage versus playoffs teams in their own conference. One loss percentage versus the playoff teams in the other conference, and then net points in all games. So
oh wow, net points in all games. That's funny.
yeah, so like point differential.
Yeah,
which is a good tiebreaker, but
that honestly, I feel like that should be higher. I feel like.
Yeah.
Or
maybe just do like a net points multiplied by strength of victory.
Like, but head to head is weird because like a head to head is a poor thing because like if it comes down to if Houston and Golden State end up having the same record this year, it's going to come down to head and Houston will win it. But I mean that's sort of like I mean I think the Warriors played one game against them without Kevin Durant, so like it's like.
Yeah, and it definitely comes up like why that matters so much when you have teams when you have a situation like the year that the 3 for 6 seeds in the East were all tied, and like you had to go like head to head between all all four of them, and like it was a ridiculous thing. But just
I think this season it's going to be a big topic of discussion because there are probably going to be a lot.
Oh yeah,
of teams.
like it's going to be super tight.
Yeah, like there are probably going to be a ton of teams with like 47, 48 wins or something like that.
Yeah, so like here. This is something I was going to try and transition to. Give me your list of tiebreakers for a playoff seed right now.
What do you mean?
Like, so like, what would so let's say you have any number of teams that are tied for a specific seed. What should be the criteria that they should use to determine who should be getting that seed?
Honestly, I think above all, it should be record in your conference, simply because like both conferences I feel like have a disparity between the good and bad teams. So I feel like that's even in terms of like because like I think a big issue right now is like a team in the East will have a worse record than a team like the eighth team in the East will have a worse record than the eighth team in the West, but they'll still be able to be in the playoffs because of how bad the conference is. But if you go by record, like I think if you go by how they performed against their own conference, it gives you more of an idea of like okay, like this is how they performed against their competition, and then this is how they performed against their competition. So I think head to head should be factored probably maybe like third. And then in between, I would probably use like record against the other conference.
Okay.
Because record against the other conference is, I think, also a pretty good measure because it simply shows you how you competed against, like those teams that you were allegedly better than if you're the better conference. And then fourth, I would use point differential because, that just shows like you were able to win by this much and that team was able to win by less. So.
Yeah, not a fan of.
I don't think divisions really matter that much because you have some divisions that are much more difficult than others.
Yeah, definitely.
Like San Antonio and Houston are in the same division. Like that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm sure you remember that one year where like all 5 of those teams made the playoffs, and then like.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think even I'm not sure what I think the Lakers and Clippers are also in Golden State's division, right? And then like and then Portland as well. So like it's something like 4 of those teams. When let's assume the Lakers like make the playoff next year or the year after, you're probably going to have all 4 of those teams in the playoffs, and then you're going to have
you're probably going to have all 8 of your playoff teams only from 2 divisions if so.
Yeah, and my biggest problem with it is this isn't a baseball system where you're playing 95 games against the teams within your division. You're only playing like 24 games against the teams in your division out of an 82 game season.
Also, the other thing about the NBA schedule in general that I feel like needs some modification is that the fact that you only play 2 games against teams outside of your conference.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second. I'm just going to give my tiebreakers real quick because that's actually a fantastic segue. I was going to ask about that. So my tiebreakers would just be a net points times a strength of victory because I've completely attached to that at this point. I think that's a fantastic system, and it essentially matches the one in the EPL. Like if you have like your point differential, as I was saying about Pythagorean expectation, which is it's based on that. That says a lot about like if you got lucky or something, or like how good you were doing, because it's a lot more impressive to blow a team out like the 76ers are doing right now against the Nets than to win by 1 point. And then just multiply that by strength of victory because it's more impressive to win against good teams than bad teams. And then I say go to conference one loss percentage, then go to head to head, and then if you still have problems, I don't know, flip a coin, and I don't really have anything past that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, flipping a coin is perfectly fair. Like
Yeah.
50-50. So.
Yeah. But so I'm really curious to see what you think about the NBA schedule because I was going to ask it because there's a lot of talking going around like, oh, do we need to change the NBA schedule? Is it 82 games correct for the league? So what do you think about it?
I think 82 is fine, but I do feel like there needs to be some balancing. Whereas if you're the Warriors, like you should not. If you're that good of a team, you shouldn't get to play 4. You shouldn't get to pick up 4 easy wins against the Kings. Like that's just not fair. You should have to play there definitely needs to be a little bit more of a spreading the schedule where maybe like you play, I don't know, like 3 games against, like how like the NFL does it, and like they make like your schedule like they accommodate it to how good of a team you are. Like it changes from year to year. So
Yeah, like you play 2 games. 2 of your games are determined based on. Okay, so basically how it works is like the NBA, the NFL does like a rotating schedule where you like each team has to face each division in the like. Okay, so here's an example. So let's say one year like the NFC East has to play the NFC South and then the AFC South, and then it also each team within that division plays another division in the other conference. Well, not sorry, not another conference. It would play like a team in the AFC North or like the AFC West. I guess it's determined on like a year-to-year basis, but
yeah,
it would match the performance of the teams in each division. So the number one team from that previous year would play the number one in each of those divisions, number two to number twos, and they would just do that, and that's one way in which they can set up the schedule so it's more balanced.
exactly. Because like if you're a team like if you're if you're a team like Miami, right? Like Miami, I think has a pretty weak division. Like they're surrounded with like I think Charlotte, Orlando,
The Wizards?
some,
No, not the Wizards. My bad.
and some other team. Like basically, what I'm saying is like if you're the best team in your division, and then there are 5 teams in your division, and then you play 4 games against each of them, 4 games against the other 4 teams, like that's like, and you're the best team in your division by far. Like if the rest of your division is complete, like, and the Warriors have had that benefit. I feel like because the Lakers, Clippers, and the Clippers, I guess this year, but
Oh, it was the Wizards.
oh, the Clippers, Kings, and Lakers, like those are teams that Golden State can easily beat 4 times in every game. So like they shouldn't get to have
Not
that.
to mention the Suns.
Oh yeah, the Sun. Yeah, like like you should not get to have that easy of a schedule if you're the best team. Like I feel like that obviously attributes to how many games you're able to win overall, which significantly impacts the 1 seed, 2 seed. So I feel like you should probably you should play more games against the better teams in your conference if you're one of the better teams in your conference. Like rather than having to play rather than playing like Houston only 3 times, like you should have to play Houston 4 times. And like instead of playing Phoenix 4 times, you should play Phoenix twice. Like you should accommodate it to how like you shouldn't get to have an easier schedule just because you're better. Like everyone should play on a schedule that fits what can give them the best chance of being good, because that's what makes it the most fair.
like you should like if you're just overwhelmingly talented, you're gonna end up winning the most games, and you shouldn't also get to benefit from having a super easy schedule like Golden State. I feel like I feel like someone ranked it, and I feel like in the past couple of years they've had like the 19th like hardest schedule.
Yeah, I'd believe it.
Yeah, the easier way to say that would, I guess, be like they've had like one of the 10th or 11th easiest schedules, which I mean, like you can't tell me that that doesn't factor into how dominant they've been. Like if your schedule is easier, you're obviously going to win more. And like, Cleveland as well. Like there's no reason that Cleveland should get to play the Hawks 4 times a year if the Hawks are horrible.
The Hawks are actually in the Southwest, but someone like the actually Cleveland's division is pretty good, but
Yeah, like that's what I'm like. Cleveland's division is like Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, and
Pacers.
Indiana. So like like when the East was actually pretty good, like that would have been a hellacious division. Like, and like I'm not sure how good the Bucks were in like 2007 or whatever, but I mean the Pistons, Bulls, and like all those teams were pretty good in the late in the for the a better part of the 2000s.
Yeah, it's a good point. So, like, would you actually want to do a system like the NFL's, or would you want to just dissolve the divisions, or if not dissolve them, just say, well, I guess you would have to if you were going to follow this suggestion that you just have every team in the conference play each other an equal amount of times and just keep the ratio between the East and the West the same.
Yeah, I honestly I would do that because I feel like the divisions really only serve the purpose of like whether or not you won your division, it would help you seed. But if you would help your seed, but now that that's gone, I feel like you could dissolve divisions in general and just do it like you should play like based on how good you are, you should play a tougher schedule. So yeah, I would probably have you play every team in your not every team in your comp. Like you could keep divisions if like, but if your division is extremely weak, then you should play less games in your division if you're a top team.
Well, how would you scale that?
I'm honestly not sure how it would be done, but I would probably like if I were to just look at the year like right now, right? Like rather than having Golden State play, like I think they like I said earlier, like rather than playing Houston 3 times, you should play Houston 4 times. Rather than playing Oklahoma City 3 times, you should play them 4 times. And then rather than playing Sacramento 4 times, you should only play Sacramento twice. Rather than playing Phoenix 4 times, you should play Sacramento or Phoenix twice. Like you should basically just like whoever whichever like the best teams are should have to play the other best teams like and you could do the division like rather than having a division based on location you could do like divisions based on like wins because then you also get more competition because like you and I last week we were watching a Phoenix and Atlanta game and because both of those teams were pretty bad like it ended up being a pretty competitive game because they're similar like in terms of how good they are. So if you did that within each conference and you just grouped it like based on like okay like these are the teams that are expected to be really good. Let's put all of them in the same division so they play the most amount of times against each other. Like basically, like honestly, like you could just straight up do it if you have 15 teams in each conference. You could do 3 divisions of 5 in each conference. Like the top 5 is one division, and then the next 5 are the next division, and the bottom 5 are another division.
Oh, I really like that actually. You just reset the divisions every year.
Yeah, you would reset the divisions every year based on how the seeding was last year. Or like, but given like completely like if a team like blows themselves up over the off season and like they trade away all the like then you could set the division based on because like obviously the NBA people like especially now that they're looking at things like gambling like they could just look at Vegas and like see how what Vegas projects the best teams will be and then put the top 5 in one division and then all those teams play each other 4 times because then it makes the schedule more competitive and it shows you really who is the best team and who's able to compete the best against with their level because like even among bad teams like if you're a really bad team and but you still like if you're a bad team but you're better than all the other bad teams then it shows you that you're the best of the bad teams so it shows you how close you are and like what else you need to maybe break into the next division but obviously they would have to also figure out like tiebreakers for teams like would you put this team in the top division or this team in the top division like there would be but I feel like the easiest way to do it would just be based on seeding so like this year's sort of a bad example in the West, but like in the East, for example, you could just put the top 5 teams in those divisions because I feel like there is a pretty clear separation between teams like like Washington is still pretty above Miami and Milwaukee and stuff like that. So
Yeah, my only problem with doing it based on projections is that sets up like a ton of corruption. Like
Yeah,
some team.
that does. Yeah, that's true. So you don't even have to do that. You could just do it based off of
Yeah, I
you
would
could
just do
really
it
just
based
do it.
off winning percentage.
You could just do it based off winning percentage from the year before, and then use the same tiebreakers that you did the year before in the playoffs. But I feel like the league would have to accommodate for teams that blow up over the offseason. Like if, like for example, like I don't think the Thunder should have like remained a team in the top division after getting rid of Kevin, or not getting rid of, but after losing Kevin Durant, and like the Clippers shouldn't have to stay in a high division if losing Chris Paul, for example. But
Uh,
you'd have to do some accommodation for that, but it wouldn't have to be by projection. They would just have to figure out their own thing for it.
I don't know. I feel like it's not that big of a deal, but if you're really insistent on that, you can just say Adam Silver gets executive privilege on that, and he can like
Yeah, he
change.
can. I mean, he gets to choose who All Star replacements are, so I feel like he should have power if he wanted to.
Yeah, but no, that would be way better than what we're currently doing. Would you keep it the same amount of? Would you like? I'm guessing you would have like the divisions be called like the super division, and then like the middle division, and then the low division. But like, would you have it be the same amount of games that you have to play within your division, and then like the same amount within your conference, and then the same against the
Yeah,
other?
I would keep all of it the same. I think the only thing that I would change is just how many times you play good teams versus bad teams. So you can just play all the teams in your division 4 times, and then play all the teams that are in your conference 3 times, and then play all the other teams from the other conference twice. Like I feel like it's fine if you. I guess like to a degree, it's fine to only play the other team. Or honestly, like you could just do it also based on like rather than having to face a really bad team 3 times. Like let's say Golden State faces who's bad in the West. Like Dallas. Like let's say the Warriors face Dallas 3 times. Rather than facing Dallas 3 times, you would face a top 14 or a team from the top division in the East 3 times. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I see what you're
And
saying.
then you would play the worst division in your conference 2 times a year. Like
Uh,
if you're a team in the best division in your conference, then you play the teams in both of the bottom divisions 2 times each. The next division 3 times each, and then the top divisions 4 times each.
yeah,
I'm not
that
sure what the total of that would be, but something like that.
no, I think that's a great system, and like that's really what I love about this podcast is just hearing all these fantastic ideas that and like I haven't even heard of before. Like just
Yeah, I was just kind of. I always think about how the NBA can be more competitive because I just hate the fact that because I feel like also if you have things like this in place, it's sort of also like it also helps to combat the issue of player movement impacting parity so much because when Kevin Durant went to the Warriors, it was just sort of like okay, like call the season over, it's done, like they're the champions.
yeah.
Like this would sort of help prevent that to a lesser degree, but still like obviously Kevin Durant's first season with Golden State wouldn't have been as easy if he played a total of 20 something games against teams that were completely awful. Like that's a fourth of the season, and like you just got to sort of coast and just completely dominate a fourth of the season. But if a fourth of your season is against tough teams consistently, then like I mean, obviously you're going to have a harder time winning the championship, and it really shows who's a better team, and it doesn't really let you escape by just having talent easily. So
Yeah, and it wouldn't even hurt your traveling that much because you're still within the same conference.
yeah, it really wouldn't because like I mean, a flight from California to Texas is not like horrendously awful. Like I'm not, that's the thing. Like you could. That's why I say that you could still lay off having to do teams in the East like that because like the travel for that would be really difficult. But you can still adjust it to have it because like I mean. There are teams like when teams go on road trips and play horrible backs to backs, they end up having bad travel anyway, so it really wouldn't be that big of a problem. Like I guess like a worse situation would be like I mean if Golden State had to fly and play New Orleans. But if you space those 4 games out across the season, it really doesn't end up being an issue.
Yeah, and like that's always my big point of criticism with with people that say we should switch to a 1 through 16 system and the for the playoffs beyond the rivalry point is just that the travel you would have to change how it would work for the regular season. You would have to change the schedule so that you're playing an equal amount of Eastern Conference and Western Conference teams. And I think that does throw the travel out of whack. It's just too much.
Yeah.
So I know one of Adam Silver's points, and this is probably going to be our last point,
Okay.
is that like the NBA should really find a way to make like a mid-season tournament, like how European football does. Like they have, for an example, like the in the UK they will have, so you have like the English Premier League, and then you'll have the FA Cup, which is just like a domestic tournament where any professional team in British soccer can, not British soccer, English soccer can enter, and then the winner is like the best team in England. And then you have like the European, not the European, the European Champions League, yeah. And then you have like the Europa League, and then you also have the World Cup going on, and then you also have the, no, actually that's about it. But like you have all these different tournaments, and even if you're going to be like the runner-up in your domestic league, then you can still win the Champions League, or you can win the FA Cup, or you can win the Europa League, and like there's just a bunch of different things that you're competing for, and I think that's a lot of the reason why they're still keeping this division thing around, so that even teams that are like the 4 seed in the playoffs or something, they can be like, hey, we can hang our division banner. So like, do you think the NBA needs to be doing more for mid-season tournaments, and if so, what would that look like to you?
I mean, I personally don't think so. I just feel like if you added more to the regular season and like had a mid-season tournament like that, I feel like it would just give players less time to rest. I just feel like it would sort of make the season a little bit more difficult. If you made it optional, however, I feel like because that would just sort of be up to like the team itself, like whether or not they want to enter all of their players. But if all of their players are willing to do it, then obviously you shouldn't be able to, like they should be able to do it if they want to. But I don't think it should be a mandatory thing.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be willing to take away regular season games for that?
I probably wouldn't. I mean, well, it depends. Like, if you keep the regular season like we have it right now, then I guess it would be fine because we have so many meaningless regular season games. But if we do the thing that you and I were just talking about making the regular season more meaningful, then no, I wouldn't.
Okay. Yeah, that's basically how I feel. I would love to see what the NBA would look like with a mid-season tournament, but I just can't think of anything that they would be able to do with it.
Yeah, the same thing. Same thing here. So.
All right. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I'm good. It was a great talk today. We had some riveting discussion.
Yeah, we had some fantastic points. If you guys didn't listen to the entire 3 hours, you're going to want to rewind because this was a good one. And
yes,
yeah,
this was.
yeah, and I thank Aradh once again for coming on. This was a really enjoyable podcast. Definitely worth rescheduling for. And if you guys enjoyed it just as much as we did, make sure to give us a 5-star review on iTunes. We really appreciate it. And hey, go to our YouTube channel at top and just type into the search bar Topical Rationalizing the Monkey Brain. It'll come up easily, and you can go back and catch up on all of the podcasts that you've missed, and even get a little unedited sneak peek on all of them. And yeah, we really appreciate you listening, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye bye.